can you please call the roll?
Mayor Brooke,
Present.
Deputy Mayor Dexter,
Here.
Councilmember French,
Here.
Councilmember Kidd,
Here.
Councilmember Meredith,
Here.
Councilmember Sherman-Warren,
I'm here by telephone. I apologize. It was about 2 seconds to end the line, so if I interrupt anyone, I apologize.
Manager West,
Present.
Assistant City Attorney Chris Calhoun.
Present.
Thank you. So let us rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Right, so we will move on to ceremonial matters. And Manager West is going to lead this effort. As three of us are stepping down.
Good evening, everyone. I have a real privilege tonight to talk about some of the outgoing council members, and specifically, I want to talk a little bit about what each of them has sacrificed. Specifically, if you think about it, each one of them cares so much about the community that they have put their lives on hold. They've had other considerations above their own that really stress their care and dedication to furthering the Port Angeles community and ultimately making Port Angeles as a city very successful. So tonight, again, I have the privilege of recognizing what they've done, but I want to highlight some of the great projects that we've seen accomplished just over the last year. I think it's important to share about this council's support of our paramedicine program, which is an innovative program that I think is recognized across the state to really help some of the challenges that we see out in the community. To also see their help and support for the paramedicine program, which is a pilot program through our fire department, getting care on the ground. I think fiscal responsibility in this city is something that we've needed for a long time, and all of the council members that are departing this evening have done a great deal to ensure the long-term fiscal stewardship of this community and the city of Port Angeles. One of the attributes I want to share is that since 2015, we have had no new debt entered into by any of the council members seated on the dais currently. And I think that's really important because we do have a great deal of debt. We can't afford to have new debt. And I really appreciate how much this council has stepped up to ensure we're thinking about the long term and looking at the long-term needs of the community. It's pretty difficult to cover all the things I want to say about the departing council members because there's a lot I'd like to share. But I'm going to start going council member by council member, and I'm going to share a proclamation that we have provided to each of those council members. I'm going to start with Michael Meredith, and Michael, would you please come up?
She's the first over there.
So we are going based on term. And Michael's been with us for about 4 years now. So Michael, I'm going to read the proclamation this evening. This is a proclamation in recognition of the public service of Michael Meredith. Whereas the City of Port Angeles recognizes Michael Meredith for his outstanding public service as a Port Angeles City Council member from January 2016 to December 2019. Throughout his time on the council, Michael Meredith consistently expressed his commitment to community safety and welfare, as well as listened with interest to the citizens of Port Angeles, hearing their concerns and advocating for his constituents. Whereas the council as a whole has realized many accomplishments over the last 4 years, focusing on priority issues that matter most to the greatest amount of citizens, setting the stage for the future of Port Angeles, creating policies that will ensure the health and sustainability of the city, both environmentally and economically. And whereas during the time on council, Michael Meredith has been a part of several substantial projects, recognizing the significance of community facilities, council offered their support to many projects, including civic field improvements. In addition, he gave the community options through code enforcement funding, and provided long-term direction through the comprehensive plan amendment. In addition, through a combined effort of city, community, and state, Council saw the completion of the 8th Street Bridge Protective Fence Screen project. And whereas Michael's service extended beyond his regular meetings and work sessions, in addition to his time on the City Council, Michael participated on the William Shore Pool Board and the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And whereas throughout his term on council, Michael has openly expressed his interest and dedication to the balance of his time between family, work, and his position on council, the city appreciates and values his participation and perspective. The City of Port Angeles sincerely thanks Councilmember Michael Meredith for his dedication, advocacy, and contributions to our city and community. Now, therefore, Mayor Sissy Brook, on behalf of the City Council of Port Angeles, and Nathan West, City Manager, on behalf of the city staff, do hereby sincerely thank Michael Meredith for his commitment, service, and dedication to his city. We wish you the very, very best in all your future endeavors. Michael. Of staff for all that you've done for us. We greatly appreciate all of the work that you have done to support staff, your direct form of communication, the realities that you bring to us every day that ensure we're thinking of all the citizens in this community. We're so appreciative. Michael, thank you.
I'll get back to work.
It's out there. That's next.
So I'd like Sherry Kidd to come up next, please. So this is a proclamation in recognition of the public service of Sherry Kidd. Whereas the City of Port Angeles recognizes Sherry Kidd for her outstanding public service as a Port Angeles City Council member from January 2008 to December 2019, serving as mayor from January 2012 to December 2013, and as deputy mayor from January 2016 to December 2017. Throughout her time on the City Council, Sherry Kidd expressed her passion for community, safety, and welfare while on the council. She has been a true advocate for her beautiful city. Whereas the council as a whole has realized many accomplishments over the last 12 years, focusing on priority issues that matter most to the greatest amount of citizens, setting the stage for the future of Port Angeles, creating policies that will ensure the health and sustainability of the city, both economically and environmentally. And whereas during her 3 terms on council, Sherry Kidd chaired the Port Angeles Forward Committee, initiating the 2009 American Institute of Architects grant, providing guidance and oversight to the Waterfront Development Project. With this project, the city has been able to renew, renovate, and create new public access areas along the city's downtown waterfront, enhancing the focal point for the city's economic, cultural, and environmental assets. And whereas the council recognized the significance of community facilities through their support of the civic field projects, provided community support through code enforcement funding, and long-term direction through the comprehensive plan amendment. On April 21st, 2015, the council passed Resolution 0315, authorizing Councilmember Sherry Kidd to pursue outside funding for improved life safety protection of the 8th Street bridges, a project very close to her heart. Sherry championed the project and actively pursued legislative support for the project. Through a combined effort of city, community, and state, council saw the completion of the 8th Street Bridge Protective Fence Screens project. And whereas the council has made a substantial investment in the environmental health of the region, completing the combined sewer overflow project, the largest public works project in the history of Port Angeles, and through the landfill bluff stabilization project, relocating more than 380,000 cubic yards of solid waste and asbestos inland, preventing it from falling into the Straits of Juan de Fuca.
That included my old key roller skates.
That's okay. And whereas Sherry's service extended beyond the regular meetings, in addition to her time on the City Council, she also participated on various boards and committees, including PA Forward, the Utility Advisory Committee, and the William Shore Memorial Pool Board. The City of Port Angeles sincerely thanks Councilmember Sherry Kidd for her dedication, advocacy, and contributions to our city and community. Now, therefore, Mayor Sissy Brooke, on behalf of the City Council of Port Angeles and Nathan West, City Manager, on behalf of city staff, do hereby sincerely thank Sherry Kidd for her commitment, service, and dedication to her city. We wish you the very best in all of your future endeavors. Sherry, thank you. And Sherry, I do want to say just a couple more words of appreciation from staff for your support, for your time and dedication, for your dedication to ensure the implementation of the many projects that we've seen implemented over your time here. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. My honor.
Mayor Brooke, it's so much a privilege to have worked with you and to be participating with you in this local city government and recognizing the importance and the meaning that that brings to our community members every day. I'm so appreciative. I want to read the proclamation for Mayor Sissy Brooke, a proclamation in recognition of public service of Sissy Brooke. And whereas the City of Port Angeles recognizes Mayor Sissy Brooke for her outstanding public service as a Port Angeles City Council member from January 2012 to December 2019, serving as mayor from January 2018 to December 2019. During her 2012 to 2019 tenure, Sissy routinely expressed her passion for community peacemaking, always willing to lend an ear to a constituent. And whereas the City Council as a whole has realized many accomplishments over the last 8 years, focusing on priority issues that matter most to the greatest amount of citizens, setting the stage for the future of Port Angeles, creating policies that will ensure the health and sustainability of the city, both environmentally and economically. And whereas during her 2 terms on council, Sissy Brooke has been part of several substantial projects, including the Waterfront Development Project. With this project, the city has been able to renew, renovate, and create new public access along the city's downtown waterfront, enhancing the focal point of the city's cultural and environmental assets. Sissy was a voice for the local indigenous tribes, advocating for recognition of tribal history, culture, and language. She advocated for the incorporation of native language into city parks and future wayfinding signage. And whereas the council also recognized the significance of community facilities through their support of the resolution of the Elwha Water Treatment Facility, provided community support through code enforcement funding and long-term direction through the comprehensive plan update and amendment, and in addition through the combined effort from the community and state, council saw the completion of the 8th Street Bridge Protective Fence Screen Project. And whereas the council has made substantial investments in the environmental health of the region, completing the Combined Sewer Overflow Project, the largest public works project in the history of Port Angeles, and through the Landfill Bluff Stabilization Project, relocating more than 380,000 cubic yards of solid waste and asbestos inland, preventing it from falling into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and recognizing the vital importance of planning for climate change, encouraging the creation of resilient community as it relates to our changing natural environment. And whereas Sissy's service extended beyond the regular meetings, in addition to her time on council, she also led various boards and committees, including the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, Climate Action Group, and Housing Task Force, The City of Port Angeles sincerely thanks Council Member Sissy Brooke for her dedication, advocacy, and contributions to our city and community. And now, therefore, Kate Dexter, Deputy Mayor on behalf of City Council of Port Angeles, and Nathan West, City Manager on behalf of City staff, do hereby sincerely thank Sissy Brooke for her commitment, service, and dedication to our city. Sissy, we wish you the very best in your future endeavors. About Sissy that I think all of you should be aware of. I think it's really important that as staff, it's important to us how our council meetings are run. It makes a difference to us every Tuesday night when we come here to council that those meetings are run well, that we have a peaceful environment. What I so appreciate about what Sissy has done for this community is bringing harmony to this chamber, to ensuring that we have harmony and compassion every day when we meet in this room, when we meet as council, that we treat each other with compassion and respect. I so appreciate, Sissy, that you brought that to the table. I think it's also important that the community be aware of Sissy's dedication to continuity for the City of Port Angeles, ensuring that what she has learned as a council member gets instilled in the new council members coming on board, sharing with them about the experiences, sharing with them about what the city's needs are, what are those priority issues, and making sure that there is continuity and a continuation of the really important mission of the City of Port Angeles. Sissy, thank you.
I just want to say it's been an honor and a pleasure to serve Port Angeles. It's been a job I didn't want, and when I took it over, I knew it was needed, and so I have been grateful to have this experience. For the new city council members, please know that we're here. We're hoping to keep this a place where people can talk and be respectful of each other and talk to each other well, so that everybody can listen. And most of all, I need to thank Ron. Without him, I would not be able to spend as much time as I have here. So thank you, Rob, because you've made it possible for me to be able to do this for Port Angeles. Thank you. And we are going to do public comment, and then after that, we're going to break for cake. So stick around. So we have a couple of folks signed up. Jim Hardwick. So,
Mayor, could you please clarify, are we having a separate comment for the school board levy, or is that going to be part of this comment?
it's a separate. So if you've got comments about the school, then
It is separate.
it is separate. So there'll be a space for it. So then we've got Candace. Oh, that's all capital. They're all capital. Okay, so everybody on the list is going to do later. Is there anybody in the audience right now who would like to speak to council on anything at all?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. I'm Dale Wilson. I do live in the city. I noticed with some concern that the city has put out for bids the work of dismantling the electrical plant we have out at Morse Creek. And I'm not sure what the plans are, because there haven't been any stories on it. There hasn't been any public involvement. There hasn't been any public hearings. So I speak out of a lot of ignorance, but a little bit of knowledge too. That is a spring-fed creek which hardly ever runs dry. With climate change, with the lack of snowpack, we're going to need that water. And I've been marinating myself in Cascadia Rising, emergency management, and these type things. And if the power lines go down between here and Bonneville, or if something happens to Bonneville, we're going to need a power supply to run the hospital, to run the courthouse, to run the city council, or the city hall. And I know that it's not up to speed right now. It's not up to what the people in Olympia would like to have it. But if we have the Cascadia Rising, it's going to be such a catastrophe that we're going to be able to hotwire whatever facilities we need to get electricity from Morris Creek over to the main places where we need it here in town. So I would certainly ask that the city council have a public hearing and certainly a lot more conversation about dismantling the electric producing equipment out at Morris Creek. And please don't sell our water rights. There's going to be a time, it may not be in my lifetime, but it will be in the lifetime of some of the younger people in the room, that we're going to need that water. And it's very likely we're going to come a time we're going to need that electricity. So please put this before a hearing and let the entire community weigh in on the need and the necessity of dismantling this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to address council at this time on any issue or non-issue whatsoever? All right, seeing none, let's break for cake. So we will be back here in 10, 15 minutes.
The Peninsula Daily News, as well as noticed on the Port Angeles City website. And at this time, our recommendation is that council entertain comments for and against the Port Angeles School District levy resolution.
Right. So we will entertain comments for and against the levy. So I've got this sign up. So I guess we'll start with the sign up and then we'll move forward.
Good evening. Jim Haywood. I live in the city of Port Angeles, and I'm currently the 2019 president of the Port Angeles Chamber of Commerce. The board of directors at their November meeting unanimously approved supporting the Port Angeles School Capital Improvement Plan and the February 2020 levy. Support of this plan fits the Chamber's organizational mission, which is to cultivate an environment where business can thrive. The Port Angeles School District high-performing academic curriculum with modern facilities clearly supports this objective. And our rationale was based upon 4 convincing factors in this plan. First of all was the improvement of community safety and security. This plan invests in community assets. It will include 5 9.3 earthquake standard construction buildings for the safety of residents in town. And the 2020 capital levy will complete modern student safety improvements and design for single point of entry in all of the elementary schools at the end of the first levy. Number 2, it provides a long-term capital facilities plan that is performance-based. The citizens get a right to vote every 5 to 6 years to continue the plan. And the Chamber was very supportive of that idea moving forward. And by the way, the first levy will pay off those safety improvements and Stevens Middle School improvements in 5 years. The state policy, the way it is now, capital facilities improvements and building the schools is about 75% our responsibility as a community. So that's not going to change anytime in the near future, and we need to take responsibility for that. This plan does establish property tax predictability. The plan is for $2.62 or less per thousand for the upgrade and improvement to 5 of our schools over the next 27 years. The total rate is $1.11 per thousand over what we currently paid for the school district operation in 2018. $1.11 more. And it's $1.36 less than the total rate for the last bond that was offered to the citizens of Port Angeles. Our fourth bit of support for this came from the achievement of operational educational efficiencies. This is to modernize our school buildings with both construction and interior comforts and design, but also technology systems, which we need to upgrade. And most importantly, this realigns our school system back to a middle school system where 6 through 8 is in one building, which provides better continuity and learning environment rather than turning over classes in 50% of the school on a yearly basis. The Port Angel School Plan provides a long-term solution for upgrades and replacements of aging buildings with 1960 construction standards. The levy and capital bond lay out an investment path for us as a community for future strength and health of our community. The Chamber sees good academic programs in modern facilities as a reflection of our community values and priorities. So I urge the Council tonight to support the levy and vote yes. Do not take a neutral position or a no position, but take a yes position that you support for this improvement to our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Candace Campbell?
Hello, I'm Candace Cathall. I am a resident of the county, but we have a couple of houses in the city, and I have 2 kids in school. So I'm here to also thank you, Jim, for doing such an awesome job of summarizing all of the well thought out plans that the school district has worked so hard on. And so I'm here to urge you to vote yes on the resolution to support the Port Angel School District capital levy. I just think that having adequate facilities for our teachers and students should be a priority of every community. Our facilities are aging and we need to support them financially for the future generations. If we don't pass this levy, then the buildings are just going to fall into worse repair, and eventually they're going to fail, and then the school district will have far fewer options. And as Jim said, this is just the way schools are funded. Investing in our future of our community is what previous generations have done, and that is how our schools are funded. So we need better bathrooms, for instance, and more of them. The current bathrooms at I know Roosevelt and Stevens are really horrible. And there's not enough of them, and we need to provide adequate infrastructure to support the 21st century technology. And it can't be just paint and, put some more wires in. It's really seriously outdated. I've heard that the HVAC is inoperable and can't be fixed, other than it just needs to be replaced. So I urge you to vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Metzger.
My name is Steve Meffner. I live in the county, but I have a small business in the city. Thanks for considering a measure of support. Everyone here wants the best for kids, so I'm going to talk about numbers and responsibility. So everybody's excited, right? So please, everyone, look at your property tax bill. In spending an hour going through property tax records, partially at random for properties in our school district, every single one of us who owns property in this district saw a substantial tax reduction from 2018 to 2019. Not just school taxes, but your total property tax bill. The average was about 12%. In my own case, and in most, 2019 is even lower than 2017 as well, not just 2018. The reason is the McCleary decision, which was an attempt to move school taxation from the backs of local people to the state level, and which forced our local operations levy revenue to be cut by more than half. That was the swap. We'll take it at the state level. You guys don't have to pay for it at the local level, but what that enforced was a 50-something% cut to our program and operations levy at the local level. Some of that money was given back from state collections, but was just for salaries. And our district made the difficult and very unpopular cuts needed to yank $2.5 million every year out of the budget for school programs and operations. And when the state realized the crisis they had created for small rural districts like ours, they said, go ahead and increase your local levy again as a fix. And our district did not, and has committed to living within that new rate and that new budget, less than half of what they had before. So my taxes, not just my school tax, but my gross overall property tax is a lot lower this year. The district did this very difficult belt tightening to make it easier on property owners, knowing there is a vast amount of facilities work to do in the coming decades. And this, in fact, is in the record, and it is real. They look at the bottom line for taxpayers, and they don't just ask for money to fix revenue problems when they come up. So I think that's a pretty good track record that our district has shown. Now, after the failure of the previous measure by 115 votes, we heard an outpouring of angst as well as resolve. What we also heard is that almost everyone on both sides of the decision acknowledges that our schools need serious attention. And the argument, though, is about the details. And I would like to thank everyone on both sides for adding focus, detail, affordability, and long-term stability, and periodic voter control of the current plan. Voters will get to decide every 5 to 6 years if they're satisfied with how well the district is keeping to its commitments and to its budget. This is a performance-based plan that puts our town on a 30-year cycle of continuous school renewal. It's the kind of thinking that goes well beyond ourselves, well beyond our generation, well beyond our current officials and administrators. It's how we should be thinking as Americans, and not just of ourselves and our current state of need, but of the kids and the families who haven't even been born yet. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Megan Euchre.
Good afternoon or evening. My name is Megan Euchre. I live at 2012 West 6th. And I moved to Port Angeles in 2005 when my oldest daughter was in kindergarten. She's gone through, both my daughters have gone through the public schools here, and I sincerely appreciate the educational, the Port Angeles School District and the broader educational community that's tried to give them every opportunity that they could possibly take advantage of here in our community. However, I have had numerous friends and colleagues move away over the years, and the consistent reason that I've heard is the condition of our schools and the quality of our schools. Really, it's about the conditions when they can move and to a place where there's brand new schools and just all the bells and whistles that you might imagine. So I really think that we can spend lots of money trying to attract folks here, but again, those healthcare professionals, those educators, those government officials, and other folks just are really going to be looking at the quality of our schools. And those schools are a community investment in ourselves. We use those schools for, recreational sports practices. We use that for emergencies, a gathering place in times of emergency, and for community events. They're not just used by the students and staff. So I would encourage us to invest in our community by supporting the school levy. I ask that of you tonight, and I ask our citizens to learn more if they have questions and consider voting yes when that comes up. Really, your ballots will be coming out in January. So again, I think that's a true investment in our community that we just can't pass up as a real foundation for a well-educated and safe population, or a safe place for our kids to be educated and for us to gather and use as community facilities for a really vibrant community. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to speak pro or against? And hear all voices, please.
Good evening. My name is Laurel Black, and I live out on the county, and I do live in the school district, and I have a daughter who went through from kindergarten to Running Start, so I have some background in the schools as well. I would like to add my voice to those who support the Port Angeles School District capital levy and respectfully ask you as a council to endorse its passage as well. As you know, the deteriorating state of our school buildings has been an issue since at least the 1990s. I believe the district administration has come up with a very innovative way to address the growing costs by staging the upgrades over 30 years and having a new vote every 5 years. As a community, we keep kicking this can down the road, and every time we do, the price tag goes up. I think we have a rare opportunity to finally get a handle on tackling the long overdue work our school buildings need. If we don't, at some point we will be out of options, and then the entire community will suffer. And that's because without an educated, well-trained workforce, none of us can live here. This isn't just a matter of quote-unquote doing it for the kids. We need to consider who will provide services like health care and public safety, and who will be available to employers to hire to keep our economy going. 50 years ago, a kid could drop out of high school in the 11th grade, pick up a saw, go in the woods, and make a pretty good living. Those days are long gone, and nearly all jobs, including jobs in the woods, require higher skill levels. So teaching 21st century skills with deteriorating 20th century equipment and facilities is not realistic. It is also worth noting that there are tax relief options for low-income seniors and the disabled. On the district's levy FAQ page, it says, persons at least 61 years of age or persons under 61 years of age and retired from regular gainful employment due to a disability who earn less than $35,000 annually may qualify for the senior exemption or disability exemption. And in addition to that, $18.4 million in state assistance is available should the levy pass. I think the school district has done a lot to make the levy as financially viable as possible. And to characterize it as some kind of government money grab, as some do, I believe is irresponsible. Now, I know all of you council members have the best interests of our community at your hearts. So I hope as a council you will see the necessity of this capital levy and give it your endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience?
I'm John Henry. I live at 1315 Beach Street in Port Angeles. I teach math at Port Angeles High School in a room that's in the 1950s was state of the art, and it's about 10 years before I was born. And now it's pretty antiquated, and the systems are just failing. The heater's so loud that I have to turn it off while I teach, because otherwise the students can't hear me. And within 10 minutes, my room's cold because there's no insulation. And the power structure, I have a smart board, I try to be innovative with my teaching and get out there and use technology. But 3 or 4 times a year, someone in a room next to me will turn something on and my entire workstation will cut out because we bought the circuit breaker and we have to call the custodian. I don't have a phone, so I have to go across the hall to get somebody to call the custodian. They come down, pop the circuit breaker, and 10, 15 minutes later, I'm back up and running. So, I'd like to teach in facilities that have 21st century capabilities, but we just don't. And I think that's a disservice to our kids. I think this town is worth investing in. I've been here for 30 years. I'd like to retire here, and so the other side of my thing, I can just beside being a teacher, I'll do the best job I can, no matter what the facilities are. But I want to retire here, and I think this town is worth the investment for our future. And so we need to start now so that we have a viable town 30 years from now when I'm old and gray and retired. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Anybody else?
Justin Kimball, 1128 East 3rd Street. I'm not good at improv, so my wife and I moved to Port Angeles in 2012. We wanted to start a family. We wanted to establish roots. We had our daughter in 2013. We bought our first home in the city in 2015, where we still live. We fell in love with Port Angeles on day one when we dropped off our U-Haul, and out of the blue, Bob asked us if we wanted to meet the mayor. We love how supportive and close this community is, and I want to continue that. I want to continue this support for generations to come. I want the community to thrive, and that simply cannot happen without adequate and safe schools. This isn't a tax. I know it's a tax, it's a levy, but this is an investment, and investments, it's an investment in our city, it's an investment in our kids, but it's also an investment in ourselves. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Anybody else in the audience who would like to speak for or against this issue? This levy. All right. So, I don't see anybody else. Last chance? Okay. Seeing none. Council, how do we want to move forward? Is there anything you would like to say?
I make a motion that we support the Port Angeles School District Proposition 1 levy and to invest in our schools for our children's future.
Second.
All right.
2 second delay.
That's right. So we got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I agree with the speakers tonight. We must invest in our children's future. We must invest in our infrastructure. Our children's future is everyone's future. Our children's future is the future of our city. So the kids, our teachers, our kids need adequate facilities. We need proper infrastructure, and the longer we delay, the more costly it will be to all of us. But this is, most of the time, I'm not in favor of new taxes. This is an investment, and this is what we need to do as a community. Come together, support our schools, and I'm just absolutely divided. I'm delighted to support this. It's a good plan. I've seen the presentation a few times because I belong to several civic clubs. And I think it's a wonderful plan. Incrementally, it'll be improving many schools. It's a good, it's well presented, it's well thought out, and we must invest in our schools before it's too late.
Is the motion on the table to adopt the resolution or just a statement of support? Just a clarification.
Well, actually, I believe it needs to be a statement of support.
Because we have a resolution that we can pass if we want to.
Okay, well, I'm missing that page, but,
So here, let's read the resolution. The resolution of the City Council for the City of Port Angeles, Washington, in support of Proposition Number 1 to finance a capital levy to expand and renovate Stevens Middle School and to improve safety at all school facilities.
yes, to vote on passing the resolution, please.
All right, so Lindsay, do you accept that modification to the motion?
Yeah.
Okay, then I also will say that I really appreciate the work that the school district has put into coming up with a plan that addresses so many of the things that people raised concerns about in the past. Selfishly, I have one child who might be able to take advantage of part of a renovated middle school. But I just think we've talked before about how important, and it was raised again tonight, this issue is, even from an economic development standpoint. And when we were interviewing council candidates, a number of, or maybe all of them, talked about, we asked a question about economic development, and they all talked about how important it is to attract, to continue to work to attract businesses to our community. And so I think it goes beyond even attracting professionals, but if we want someone to move a business in here, we want them to feel good about it and know that their employees will be able to send their kids to safe schools, and that our schools will be attractive to them. And I don't think, I think it was addressed also, but I do want to reiterate, I think our kids are getting a really amazing education here, despite the capital facilities, but I really think it would be great if our capital facilities matched the quality of education that they're getting. So I will definitely be supporting this.
Look, I'm not sure anybody wants to pay for this.
But what is the other option? There aren't really any other options. The same schools that my kids go to today are the same schools that I went to. Not that I'm that old, but when you walk through them, Franklin School's the same as it was the day I went there, same as the day I left. And everybody'd like to live through society for free, but that's not the way society works. And we're all going to have to pitch in to get these schools updated. And it is a deterrent to businesses that want to move here. Businesses that look around and look at our schools, and many of them, I'm sure, turn around and say, no, thank you. You don't have to walk in our schools to see the condition that our schools are in. And it's an investment that, you know, my 3 children aren't going to see. One of them's already graduated and the other 2 will be gone before it gets there. But it's an investment in those future children, and it's an investment in our town, not just our schools. And folks can complain. I hear them complain. That's okay. But it's our part to pitch in to get these schools upgraded for our kids so that they are prepared when they move beyond our Port Angeles schools. And when they get into these newer schools and they see, you know, all of the technology available, and my daughter is off to college this year, and it is a very old school where she's going, but it's also very updated. They have invested in that, and we need to invest in that.
So I appreciate all the comments of my colleagues. I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping first. You know, one of the things that we wanted to have happen was people to speak for and against this measure. We did get some emails from people that expressed an interest in speaking against it. I think it's a shame that they didn't show up to do so, because in my mind, you know, I believe in the Socratic method. I think to get the best results, your ideas have to face criticism. And I think the strength of this plan is that it did face criticism. We went through an election process and we failed, and we had feedback from our community. And I think that the school board and the leadership of the school district did a lot of soul searching and responded to that criticism and listened to our community. So I think that that's a huge point in their favor. I also just like to say, I'm really thankful for the community that we have. You know, we think of ourselves up here, we do a lot of public speaking, we get quoted in the paper, and then people come to us. I'm just going to read some of the comments that were made at this public hearing. People talking about, you know, this town is worth investing in. I think that I couldn't put it better. I think that when we look around, we see the private sector investing all the time in Port Angeles. We see the public sector investing in a new pool. We see private developments happening downtown in multiple different places. And so I think that, you know, I totally agree. This town is worth investing in. We have people talking about, you know, let me find it, you know, experiencing friends and colleagues leaving the area because of the condition of our school facilities. That is a huge concern. And when we had a housing task force, that concern got brought up by so many different community partners. It got brought up by our hospital. It got brought up by, you know, the Coast Guard. It got brought up by so many different people, because people come in and they see the strength of our programs. And just to respond to, you know, something that we got brought up, when you go to other school districts, they saw these bells and whistles. And I think that just to acknowledge something, we're not going to see a bunch of bells and whistles in our new skill facilities. We're not going to see, you know, we're not going to be able to compete with what really wealthy school districts can do. But where we do compete with them is in our programs. We're a small school district that consistently wins statewide awards. Our Hamilton Elementary School won a national whole child award a couple years ago. Our high school music programs win awards all the time, regionally, statewide. We absolutely compete when it comes to programs. All we have to do is make sure our facilities are in that ballpark, and I think that we will see people come to our area and say, and agree with that, we are the place to invest. And you know, I'm the Port Angeles City Council representative of the Chamber of Commerce, and so I've been involved in those discussions. I really appreciate the leadership of the Chamber to step up and say, this is the time to invest. You know, that one sentence from our Chamber strategic plan, our job is we want to cultivate an environment where business can thrive, and such a key part of that is schools. So I absolutely appreciate all the work that's been done for this. I will support this measure, and I think that I'm very excited to see what happens in February.
Lindsay, do you have some comments?
It's an excellent plan, and I'm glad that the council is supporting it. I do want to address the emails we received from people asking us to not take that position. They seem to think that the state law that allows the city council to make a statement in support is an unjust law, so to speak. They compared it to the fugitive slave laws, which I think is a great example of how important education is for how we understand history and modern laws compared to other laws and what other modern laws we have that might compare with fugitive slave laws. So I also took the time to review their website, stopvaschooltax.com. And on the very first page, I found what I believe to be misinformation about the tax rates for utilities in the city of Los Angeles. Based on my knowledge as a council member, if that's off, I wonder how much other misinformation is on that page. So I agree with Councilmember French that it's important to have a dialogue with those who oppose the direction we want to go as a council and the direction we think is wise for the city as a whole. But I think it's important that we do that with proper facts before us, and I'm concerned that those opposing this measure are not coming forward with accurate information about the tax situation within Port Angeles and what the school district is actually proposing.
Thank you. And I'll pipe in saying that I believe that, yes, this is our responsibility. I think the schools were well taken care of a long time ago, and then we stopped. For some reason, we stopped. And now we are way behind. And not one of our schools is in good condition. They're all either poor or there's one fair, there's a bunch of them poor, and so it's like, that's not right. So we are going to have to make up some of the stuff. I appreciate this levy. I personally want to see more, but I know we need to begin somewhere. This is a great beginning. I love the long-term plan that is going to address our schools, but we've got to get our schools in a good shape. So I'll be supporting this. All right, so we've got a motion on the table and a second to support.
Mayor, before we vote, I just want to disclose that Mr. Henry was my next grade science teacher.
Thank you for that disclosure. So we got a motion on the table and a second. Any last comments? No? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. All right. So let's, I guess, move back to our agenda. Any late items, staff?
Madam Mayor, we do not have any late items this evening. However, we do have a late piece of information in the packet, and that is the memorandum for lodging tax came a little bit late because the committee realized it needed additional work, and so it moved its meeting or moved to complete its decision this Monday, and that's why you didn't see it in your packet earlier. It has been placed on the dais as well as emailed to Councilmember Sherman Warren. So you do have that for you this evening, but it was listed on the agenda knowing it should be ready for tonight's meeting.
Great, thank you. So, and I know that there was a thought of maybe you've got the consent agenda of potentially moving that medical equipment purchases from contracts and purchasing onto the agenda. Is there any issues?
Council certainly could move that.
I would support moving that. I support that. Okay, so let me move the consent agenda. We'll start with that one. Medical equipment purchases. The expenditure report from November 23rd to 2019 to December 6th, 2019 in the amount of $358,174.85. Sublease agreement, shared storage facility. PSA 2019-11, Water Systems Modeling Support, Contract Amendment 01. the 2020-2021 Humane Society Services Agreement, the Stormwater Capacity Grant Agreement between Department of Ecology and City WQSW CAP, 1921-POAN-PW-00101, and resolution ratifying a declaration of emergency Roundtree Road water main repair. And the last one is the amendment to the water contract between City of Port Angeles and McKinley Paper Company.
I move the consent agenda as read.
Second.
All right, we got a motion on the table and a second. Is there any discussion on this? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It passes unanimously. One vote opposite. All right. So on to the next one, which is proposed adjustment to the industrial transmission 2020 utility rates.
Madam Mayor and Council, I want to first apologize on this issue and that it is cutting it close to year end. But one of the things that we recognized early this month is that we had not yet moved forward with the industrial rate change required for electric utility rates for our industrial transmission customer. With that in mind, we did expedite it to the Utility Advisory Committee with the goal of having rates adjusted for the new year for 2020. We have put that on your agenda this evening, and the apology is on the basis that we are asking Council to waive the second reading to ensure that those rates are in effect when it comes January 1st, 2020.
I was wondering if you could explain what happens if they don't.
So right now, if we do not make that rate change, the challenge is that we would pay additional money to Bonneville that we wouldn't get returned to us from McKinley, who is our one industrial ratepayer for electric utility. It is not a large dollar amount. However, I think it's important to our other ratepayers that we are not paying any additional money beyond what we are needing to expend as a city specifically. And for that reason, we're still recommending the waiver of the second reading.
Thank you. So let me read the ordinance of Port Angeles Special. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending Title 13, Chapter 13.12 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to the industrial transmission electric rate classification.
So I just wanted to make a note as a member of the Utility Advisory Committee that a representative from McKinley was present at the meeting. And so they are, I'm sure staff had spoken with them already, but I just thought it was an important clarification that it came out of Utility Advisory Committee with participation, not a vote for it, but with participation, not a vote against it either, no vote from McKinley, but with participation in the discussion about it.
Move to adopt as read.
And waive the second reading.
And waive the second reading.
Second.
Okay, so we got a motion on the table and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you. So the next one is the correction to previously adopted municipal code amendments to increase residential building capacity and housing.
So Madam Mayor, I'm going to do my best, and I'm struggling with the voice tonight, but I'm going to do my best. So we identified as a small correction that was needed in the recently adopted housing code municipal changes. Staff is completely confident that the change that you see in front of you tonight that specifically addresses front yard setbacks was within the scope and the overall basically intent and description of the code changes that certainly our public were aware of and were able to participate through our couple of public hearings that were occurred. So we are recommending that we just propose, adopt the ordinance, and do the first and second waive the second reading tonight and adopt the ordinance. The two changes are specific to the R7 and R9 zoning. So in the previous version of the code changes, the change did occur
in the R11 district, however, not permitted in our districts. Specifically, it's a reduction of the front yard setback by 5 required front yard setback.
Thank you. So
And answer any questions.
before we do that, let me just read the ordinance. An ordinance of the City of Port Angeles, Washington, amending section of Chapter 17.1 and the section of Chapter 17.11 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code relating to zoning.
I move that we waive the second reading and adopt the proposed corrected amendment to Title 17 of the Port Angeles Municipal Code ordinances.
Second.
So we have a motion on the table and a second. Is there any further discussion?
So I will say that knowing what a heavy lift that project was, I think you are forgiven for this tiny, tiny error, and thank you for catching it. It's one of the weird things that I was listening to a podcast today where they were talking about setbacks on roofs in certain cities that come up weird little. So thank you for catching this correction.
Great, thank you. All right, Michael. Okay, no more comments. All right, so all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously.
Madam Mayor, if I may, just a friendly suggestion, recognizing some members of the audience this evening. I think it might be beneficial if council is willing to look at item I2, which is the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee recommendation. I know we have a lot of representatives in the audience. And then also following that, I might suggest J1, which we do have a 15-minute presentation from the city engineer. It's a very informative presentation on our local creeks. And I think moving those ahead of some of these other items might be helpful.
Sounds great. Okay, so then we will move forward with Lodging Tax Advisory Committee event grants recommendations.
All right, Madam Mayor and Council. Staff opened the application window this year for our 2020 lodging tax funding on November 4th. The application deadline was extended to November 20th. We received a fantastic response from our community, and I just want to applaud for all those applicants that did respond to our application request. So 19 event grant applications were received, and we have a total amount of $162,500, and 11 non-event or fund allocation requests were received at a total amount of $892,598. So the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee had certainly a hard task in front of them. They considered the proposals at actually 2 meetings, and the recommendation is in front of you as described in the 2 attachments. The 2 attachments in front of you. So attachment A is the larger spreadsheet that has, in summary, the recommendations from the advisory committee. The recommended amount or total amount is $952,658. And then specifically attachment B gives you not only the ranking of the events, but also how they, what the original request was and how they were budgeted per the committee's recommendation. Within the memo, there is a summary of just the council-approved budget for this particular fund, and you can reference that. It is important to note that the committee did choose to use reserves that were available to help cover the expenditures, specifically in the capital and operations categories. So both of those categories had a significant amount of requests, and the committee felt it was justified to direct some reserves to those 2 categories. And I'm here to answer any questions.
Director Berkey, my questions may go to that last comment you made, which is with attachment A, the 4th line under capital, it says reserve 5% of remaining anticipated revenue. And then also down in the operations section, the last 3 items, city priority setting, cost recovery, that sort of translates. I just wasn't exactly sure what those meant in the spreadsheet.
Yes, I can help. So the city priority setting cost recovery is a earlier council approved transfer that helps support the general fund. So the recognition that the community development staff is covering the lodging tax fund efforts, or the efforts that are affiliated with that. And so there was an agreement with council to transfer the amount of $38,000 back into the general fund to support those efforts.
And I think there's also a way of making sure that the general fund wasn't subsidizing the lodging tax.
Correct.
And so it covers those costs. And then that 5% for construction is what we said, that we were going to set aside 5% for construction. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, but then what's debt service transfer contingency?
And that's, I think, for the underground, so that the lodging tax got into debt to help with the underground, and so we're paying that back.
That's correct.
So that one we don't have much choice on. So with being in the committee, we really had a really hard time because the city requests really take up all the operational dollars. And that's maybe something to think in the future, that maybe this does not become an option for anybody else, because there was no funds. And we have used a lot of reserves out of this. So $244,794 are being spent from reserves. So, yeah, this one was a hard one in the sense that, like I said, some of those other asks, we will not be able to do that in the future, I don't believe. So how would you guys like to move forward? Any questions? Okay.
I move to approve the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee recommended amounts for event and non-event applications totaling $952,658. I'm impressed.
All right. So, okay. We've got a motion on the table and a second. Is there any further discussion?
My only
Yeah, can we clarify the reserves? What the reserves amount is and how much is it going to be after the $235,000 that this budget requires?
The reserve percentage will be 30% of the fund balance will be for expenditures. So that includes the 25% recommended balance as well as the 5% that will include reserves for capital.
And so, from what I understand, this is all the excess reserves.
Yes, that's correct. The 245,000 is the excess reserves that were collected in 2018 excess revenues for lodging tax.
So
what's the total amount of reserves?
So what's our total amount of reserves?
Total amount ending for 2020, the estimation, just for clarification.
Is that right, Lindsay? 2020, you want to know what the total reserves for 2020 will be?
Yes.
I apologize, I don't have that sheet with me. We do have that number, I just don't have it with me at the moment.
Okay, staff's going to go take a look, so hopefully we'll get an answer back soon.
It doesn't require collectors funds. I'm just trying to figure out how sustainable this is. If, I recognize that we've had some big years for tourism in the last previous years. It probably makes sense to spend that reserves that accumulated kind of a couple of good years. At the same time, when I look at it as there's reserves in a single year, that seems like we're doing a lot in 1 year that can't sustain year to year. So that's my concern with reserve answers questions. I don't need this specific.
Okay, and I think you're right about that, because I know that the committee had a lot of difficult questions to ask about what will be asked next year, and I know that there's going to be a rethinking about what will be asked for lodging, I guess what's going to be available for people to ask for lodging tax. And so I think that that's going to clarify that, especially for this category. This category is already overspent with just city requests. So, the committee also has pushed to get goals and priorities done. And so that 5% was useful in being able to at least support some of the goals and priorities. I'm hoping that the next council member who is going to be leading that, the lodging tax, can continue to move some of that forward. So, but I think Manager West has got some comments.
Madam Mayor and Council, I did want to add a few comments. And Councilmember Schoenborn, you are absolutely correct. I think it's important that some of the decisions being made tonight relative to lodging tax wouldn't be able to be sustained in future years. And in particular, I think it's important to communicate that those entities receiving operational funding probably could not rely on that in future years to come. I think ultimately what was decided by the committee was looking at some one-time expenditures to really help get some of these operational aspects off the ground. But from a budget perspective moving forward, we can't continue that sustainably. I do think that the large dollar amount that you're seeing spended is really mostly directed at capital this year, which is a really valuable investment that we probably haven't seen enough of in the past. So it's greatly appreciated. We're seeing good investments in our capital tourism product. I think that's something to celebrate. And Councilmember Shroman Ward, I think you asked another question that maybe you didn't get a good, clear answer on. In the transfer, the debt transfer item, I think you had also mentioned contingency. And I think there's about $1,500 in contingency there. I do want to highlight that that constitutes memberships to organizations such as the Tourism Alliance, as well as it covers some very minor costs associated with our car charger in the downtown. In that we have the ability to allow electric vehicles to charge in the downtown. Those visitors to our community who are coming from a long way, that covers those very minor costs, but it's a matter of a few $100s. It's a pretty small dollar amount.
And also, just to clarify, Councilmember Sherman-Warren, I do have the amount for the reserve balance. The estimated at the end of 2020 would be $212,300. And that, again, is with the 25% plus the 5% for capital.
So is this the first year we've set aside 5% for capital expenses?
It is.
Okay, so right now we just have like that 35,000-ish.
Correct, yeah.
And so then going forward, it seems like we need to talk about what is our strategy for why we're reserving capital. Like if you're setting aside money for something, we should talk about what, so that, I don't think we need to do that today or right now, right? But that's something that should be on our minds as a staff and as a council.
Right, and I would
What
say
are we saving it for?
that would be great to, like I said, as the committee identify some priorities to see whether those are the priorities that council would approve, and also to see if that may be a way of doing it. Because I know that the number one priority was maintaining what we have and making it like the pier, the zigzag, cleaning up and maintaining the downtown so it looks nice. That was the number one priority for the committee.
Yeah, and
That could be some of that.
Sure.
The other one was transportation.
The only mild criticism I will give is when I look at the event grant proposals. I appreciate that the scoring rank is going to be complicated. That I'm not going to criticize the scoring rank, but I will say that it's disappointing to see festivals that have a 20-year history of being funded still getting 80 or 100% of their funding request granted. I think that's just, I think one thing that from the nonprofit world, there's many grants that the grantor does not allow you to apply more than 2 years in a row, where you have to take a year off.
And that may be a council policy that would be very useful to guide the lodging tax committee. We need to be able to set that because we don't have that right now. And so something we felt like if the craft festival was not there, it would be a huge loss.
And I don't disagree with that. I think that's, there's a reason that it's ranked number one. It happens in late October. I don't have any criticism of where it's ranked, but like I said, I think that it's not necessarily good to be giving money to the same exact events 20 years in a row. I have one other comment. I do appreciate the funding for the Waterfront Center. I think that's an investment that we want them to be successful, and so I appreciated that. And I also want to recognize how difficult this process must have been. Looking at how many people are in and yeah.
I just want to say that I'm grateful to see the requested amount funded for the BMX track. We used to race, well, my kids, not me, regularly, and we stopped going, and there was just no interest for a while, and this year we drove by once, and they were like, all right, let's get back out there. So I really am grateful for the improvements, and I think particularly, I mean, the part that's being funded here, of course, is capital components of it, but I think just in general, it's worth noting the improvement in access and the thought that has gone into making it accessible for anyone in our community to participate. And I really, really appreciate that. And I think it makes it that much more meaningful to me that this money is going to that, because it really is, has become a community asset. And so I'm grateful to see that.
And I'll just, second that. My son had his birthday party there last year. It was awesome. One thing that I'm not going to mangle the quote. I think it was Ryan Mullane, and he delivered the quote at a chamber luncheon or something. But he was talking about how, these kind of tourism-based investments are just raising the quality of life for everyone that's living here. So yeah, it's about heads and beds, and we see you guys are running events that are bringing in people that can't come in here by themselves. They have to have parents coming with them in a lot of those cases. They're running these races, and they come and spend a night in a hotel, eat at local restaurants. That's a huge amount of investment, but we're also just raising the quality of life for everyone that's living here, and that's a really meaningful thing. So great job, everyone.
Sorry for asking the more blanket questions, but I have two questions. One is, why is Port Angeles Waterfront Center under operations and not under capital? And then the other question is, what's the change in marketing services from last year to this year at $110,560?
Well, for the Port Angeles Waterfront Center, I can say that their ask was specifically they wanted to do the pre-marketing, getting ready for the marketing so that when they open their doors, the whole marketing study had been done, and at least you'd be able to have some people coming in. And then you were saying that, I'm sorry, what was the second? Oh, the marketing services.
How much did we spend on marketing services last year compared to this year?
Last year, a whole lot more than this.
So I will speak to what our current budget is for marketing, $265,000 roughly.
So 265 was spent last year for the city.
The current year.
This year.
Yeah, this year.
And then last year was 257. And that is reflecting, and I'm just making sure, we'll get to my left, that is reflecting the adjustment that was made the last 2 years. When you're seeing the revenues tracking high, we go back and amend that contract and add it a little bit more. So these two numbers, I believe, are reflective of the end total.
Right. So the marketing that's left over for the city is 110, and that's a whole lot less than we've seen in the past. But we know that RFP is not going to go out until the beginning of the year. And so what's next?
And I'll just chime in. This is something I mentioned. I'm not sure if Mayor Brooke was at the meeting when I mentioned it, that in my mind, I think that that's a policy that we might want to adjust, realizing that, basically we went to an allocation percentage for marketing. And in my mind, it seems like our marketing budget has a floor that we don't want to go below, that's not going to be based on a percentage of the overall revenues. There's going to be a real dollar amount number that we might want to spend on marketing, regardless of whether our lodging tax cycle is a big one or a slightly lower one. And so that's something I think we might want to reconsider going into the future. But I do appreciate that we have some reserves, and we're going to have some flexibility with how that RFP is going to go out.
Does that answer your question, Lindsay?
It does, yeah, and I agree with Councilmember French on that. I think we've seen a lot of really positive impact from Vertigo Marketing and their strategies and how they do things. A lot of marketing money doesn't necessarily leave the Peninsula because they reinvest it in a lot of local things as well. So we'll see kind of how that, more than 50% cut affects things on their end. I also will just reiterate my concern about basically using all the excess reserves in 1 year and make for some tough decisions for the lodging tax committee and for city staff who are submitting applications in next year and perhaps following years. So I appreciate that this seems to provide a lot of what people are asking for, and I think it's going to come at a bit of a cost next year. But I understand a lot of people put a lot of input in this, and so I'm going to vote for it and support it.
All right, any other comments? Yes.
I'm happy with all the capital improvements. I still, to sound like a broken record, have concern about some of these events and what these events are bringing in. And, you know, some of these, am I afraid they're going to go away if we don't give them as much money? I don't think so. There's a couple long-standing events that I would have to think that are doing well. They've been in our community for a while. They've been up and running. The thousands of people at one of these particular events that I see every single year, that's probably one of the largest events in this city, other than the BMX track. But as far as events go for down, that's huge, huge event.
And I would say for council and for the future council, that we really need to have a discussion on that. You know, if it's after 8 years, then they can't apply or something. I don't know, whatever you guys want to do, but that kind of gets to some of that. Well, the Lodging Tax Committee needs some guidance. All right, so we have a motion on the table and a second to approve this. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. All right, and now we're going to go on to this presentation on transportation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Tonight, I think that we have a tremendous opportunity to hear from our wonderful city engineer, Jonathan Baum. And this is a presentation that he's given before earlier in this year, and it really speaks to some of the unique challenges about our community and the way that the built environment has kind of transcribed over time. And I think that it gives us really good perspective as to what opportunities are out there, but also some of the challenges we have coming up. And we felt that it would be appropriate to give this presentation in light of us bringing a professional services agreement for the kickoff of the Peabody Culvert evaluation and potentially a project. So with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan.
Good evening, council members. Happy to be here tonight to talk to you about Peabody Creek. So when we think about Port Angeles, we appreciate where we live in between the water and the mountains. More particularly to the north, we have the Strait. To the south, we have the Olympic Mountains. But then we add to that, we have the creeks. We have 5 creeks in Port Angeles that provide pretty significant differences in topography from one area to the next. This adds complexity to development and the transportation network, but it certainly also provides so much beauty for the city that we live in. So we're going to focus today mostly on the Peabody Creek Basin. So I'll give you a little bit of background on Peabody Creek, and then we're going to get into some historical data of the Peabody Creek Culvert. We'll look briefly at Ennis Creek Basin, and then we'll round out with the discussion of the professional service contract. So Peabody Creek, it's made up of a relatively small basin. It's about 2.6 square miles, and it goes up into the foothills of the mountains, but it's not snow-fed. And then the lower half is an urban Port Angeles and through downtown Port Angeles. The final 1,700 feet go through a culvert underneath Lincoln Street and downtown. And this culvert is a structurally deficient culvert. It has a number of problems with it, which we'll discuss more. Adding to that, it's on the state's culvert injunction list for fish passage blockages. So some of the unique characteristics of the Peabody culvert, as we'll be referring to it tonight. So basically the culvert that's going from 2nd Street down to Port Angeles Harbor. So it was originally constructed in 1914. So we talked about the school district, some of our old buildings. We also have very old infrastructure underneath our streets that we don't really even see. But this original culvert is a 10-foot wide, 8-foot high concrete reinforced pipe that was built and then lined by brick underneath. In the 1920s, it was added on out to the harbor, so an 8x8 box culvert was added on, basically in the vicinity of Red Lion. And then at a later date, the entrance to the culvert was extended south, so that was an 8-foot diameter asphalt-lined corrugated metal pipe that extends basically underneath that Texaco gas station area. So some of the unique characteristics of this, as we mentioned, is on the state fish passage injunction list. The city is a part owner, and then also WashDOT is a part owner because the state highway runs over the top of this culvert. Also, it's in proximity right through the middle of downtown. So when you think about a traditional, hey, we're fixing fish passage barriers around the state, often you think of, oh, we open cut it, put a nice big bridge or box culvert in there. Well, when you're in the middle of a downtown, that could be problematic, if not infeasible. And then we also want to really think about the habitat potential. What type of habitat does Peabody Creek Basin produce? How does that compare to other creek basins in Port Angeles? So those are some of the unique characteristics that we want to think about as we're moving forward here on Peabody Creek. So it's always nice to step back and look at some historical photos. It's pretty amazing how things were built, but also gives us an idea of maybe why they were built as they were. So we look back at these photos, we see the initial construction, as we mentioned, happened in 1914. So this was part of the Port Angeles regrade, the sluicing of the downtown area. And as part of that project, if you try to imagine, Peabody Creek, it basically used to run diagonally through the middle of downtown at an angle out towards Valley Creek. So it didn't run down as it does now, right down Lincoln Street. So they rerouted it as part of this project. So in the top right-hand corner, you're seeing a picture of that sluicing activity. In the lower left-hand corner, you see the Lincoln Street trestle. Yeah, so you see the Lincoln Street trestle there. And speaking of the trestle, it was just last week in our emergency project for our sewer repair, we were down about 15 feet in Lincoln Street, and we were actually running into the old pilings from this trestle that were buried in place when Lincoln Street was filled in. So there's certainly a lot of historical information, and that gives us some information on why are we seeing some of the structural problems out there in this location now that we're going to get into a little bit more here in the future. But certainly, you think about a 100-year lifespan of a culvert, that's pretty good. When we're designing things, a lot of times we don't expect more than 100 years, and we're over 100 years already on a good portion of this structure. So moving on, this is some pictures from inside the culvert. So in 2005, the city really started to learn that there was some structural deficiencies in the culverts. We started doing more regular inspections of the culverts, and that's when we learned that the bottom of the culvert was beginning to erode out. We had missing bricks, and this upper left-hand corner, if you were to step down in that water, you'd sink down to your knees. You would think that that's the bottom of the culvert, but it's eroded out that far. You'll have pieces of rebar that you're kind of walking around as you're walking down in the bottom of that culvert right there. And adding to that, we have many different cracking and spalling of this culvert. And inspections reports have really shown that that deterioration has continued on throughout the years since we started doing regular inspections out there. The plot really thickened though, if we think that is bad, when in 2012, we had a estimated 280 square foot, 8-foot deep sinkhole that formed out on the corner of Lincoln Street and First Street. WashDOT came in, filled that in with CDF. Since then, we've found other voids. We found a void underneath the sidewalk near the Texaco gas station.
What's CDF?
Controlled density fill.
Cool.
That's actually what we put in Lincoln Street when we closed up the hole last week from the sewer repair. That way we don't have to be out there vibrating. It's a flowable fill. So in 2014, we had a study that went out there and did ground penetrating radar over the culverts. Since we were seeing these voids, we were trying to learn, well, what is out there? And so what you're seeing up on this map is the extent of the voids aren't necessarily identified, but you can tell the approximate depth and location of some of these voids out there, and helps us to be able to focus as we go through doing some type of repair potentially, where would those problem spots be? What would we need to do to repair out there? So we can see there's some very significant voids that have formed over the years, generally following the exact alignment of the culvert. And so really our conclusion from all of this different piece of information and studies is this culvert has a high potential for structural failure. And we could think about the catastrophic consequences should this culvert fail. Imagine it failing where you have a state highway running over the top, goes through the middle of downtown. It's hard to even imagine what would happen if that culvert all of a sudden collapsed. So that's why we really need to start thinking about how are we going to move forward. It's been in the works for some time, but the complexity of that project, it's really kind of stalled things out. And so that's the ultimate goal today, is finding ways that we can move forward and come up with alternatives and proceed with a design and construction that will be feasible. So when we think about some of the challenges out here in this creek, in this watershed. So if you think about a typical method of open cutting like we talked about, we have to look at the feasibility of, is it even possible to do an open cut through the middle of Lincoln Street? Certainly it'd be very high costs and significant disruptions to downtown. What we also see is Peabody Creek has a number of fish passage barriers. So all these little red triangles that we see up on the screen here are additional fish barriers. So if we were to spend millions of dollars to try to correct this location from a fish passage perspective here at between the harbor and 2nd Street, you get very little fish passage potential because we have a blockage at Peabody Street, and we have a blockage at 5th Street, and a blockage at 8th Street, and a blockage at Lordson Boulevard. It continues to go up. So that's where we start thinking about, we need to think about habitat potential. How can we make efficient use of our funds and open up the most habitat possible? And so that's where we start thinking about, well, we have multiple creeks in town. Where should we be prioritizing our funding from a fish passage perspective? So one opportunity that we really want to look at closely here is this Peabody culvert. What type of repairs are feasible on this culvert? And are there some type of modest fish passage improvements that we can install but maintain that existing culvert there? And then focus some of these fish passage dollars on some locations in Port Angeles that would yield a much higher habitat potential. So we're going to talk about a good spot that we might be able to focus in here on a slide, a few slides down, but basically Ennis Creek. There's tremendous potential in Ennis Creek. So just to kind of summarize our timeline, basically in 2005, that's when we started to determine that this culvert was having some significant deficiencies, and WashDOT came up and did some scoping on the culvert, looking at a repair option, looking at an open cut option in 2009. And then basically everything came to a halt in 2013 when this went on the state fish passage injunction list. It's at the very end of WashDOT's list because there's very little habitat potential, and the injunction focuses around opening up as much habitat as possible and as quick as possible. And by doing this project for a huge amount of money, they get very, very little habitat potential. So that's why it's at the bottom of the state's priority list. So in 2014, we found those voids and that ground penetrating radar. And in 2016, we met out with many of the different stakeholders for this project from the environmental perspective and asked them, what do we need to do to get this project moving forward? We walked through the culvert, and they basically gave us some direction. This is what you need to do to get this project moving forward, which is what is basically laid out in the professional service contract that we're bringing forward. And so going forward, our interest in 2020 is working on that environmental permitting, the alternatives, coming up with a good path forward, and then trying to look at also accelerating the restoration efforts in the Ennis Creek Basin. So when we think about if we were to move forward to some type of repair option, what would it look like? This is actually a schematic that schematic washout put together back in 2009. But basically it consists of trying to repair the lining of the culverts, the invert, some type of shock creek, and then we would be temporarily bypassing the creek during that low flow time when we were doing the repairs. And then try to put in some fish baffles and other weirs to be able to encourage fish passage up that culvert. And then finally going in from the top and stabilizing all those voids, putting in that flowable fill material down into all of the void materials so we can stabilize around that culvert. So kind of the next steps, like we talked about, moving forward with having a consultant help us out with the hydraulic analysis. That's been the consistent theme of whenever you do anything with the creek, you have to do that initial hydraulic analysis. And it gives you a lot of ideas of how you're going to move forward, and that's the document that all the stakeholders require that we put together before any kind of decisions can be made. So we're trying to look for ways that we can develop that buy-in for different options moving forward. So once we came up with that conceptual idea and it was vetted through those stakeholders, we would then be able to move forward with final design and securing construction funding for this. So this project from a design perspective is included in our 2020 CFP. It currently has $446,000 of funding allocated to the design phase of this project. So I mentioned we were going to talk briefly about Ennis Creek, and so it might seem kind of out of place, but the reason I threw this slide in here was to give us an idea of, we see those challenges on Peabody Creek. We then want to compare from a habitat potential Ennis Creek. Peabody Creek, remember we had a 2 square mile watershed. Ennis Creek has a 10.5 square mile watershed. Ennis Creek goes all the way up into the mountains where it's snow-fed, where Peabody Creek is not snow-fed. And then we look at the number of barriers. So we see the circles up here. We see 3 barriers on this creek. Removing those 3 barriers would open up about 5.4 miles of Ennis drainage basin for fish to migrate up Ennis Creek. And this creek is a very high priority also for the lower Elwha tribe. So the lower circle you see on 101, that's a fish barrier that WashDOT is just going to be starting design on next year. Actually, their engineer just came in this past week to talk to us about that project. And so they're 2 to 3 years down the road, we'll be executing a project to remove that fish blockage there. So that brings, we have 2 culverts downstream that are the city's responsibility. We have one that goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and we also have another one where our old abandoned sewer force main goes underneath the creek down by the trail. So we have we're trying to look for funding sources for those culvert repair or replacement projects. But there's certainly a tremendous potential to try to mitigate some of our efforts on Peabody Creek by focusing on some restoration efforts on Ennis Creek. So that's an avenue we will be exploring as we go throughout this work here on the Peabody project. So kind of summarizing what you have in your packet there from a professional service agreement perspective, this consultant will be helping us with this hydraulics report. That's really the key of this project. To move forward at all, we have to have that hydraulics report for the stakeholders. They'll also be helping us with analyzing different mitigation options, developing our preliminary designs and estimates for different projects moving forward, and assisting us with our stakeholder coordination and coming up with that preferred alternative. So we advertised a request for consultant services, and we had 2 consultants send us their qualifications back, and we interviewed both of those consultants. Parametrics was selected as the most qualified consultant to help us with this endeavor. So we negotiated a contract with them for $149,942.30, of which we have funds budgeted in the 2020 CFP. So with that, I'll open it up for questions and discussions.
Can you tell me about grant funding for this? Have we received grant funding for this project?
So we do not have grant funding. So what we've heard from when we've talked to different grantors is we need to have a good conceptual project so that they feel like this project's going to move forward. So basically this consultant effort is going to get us to the point where our stakeholders will have buy-in and it will have clear direction of, yes, we can get permits to do this project. And we've set it up in the form, this agreement that you see in your packet. This is the WashDOT template. So this is set up so that if we are able to secure state funding, we will be eligible for reimbursement either on this agreement or if we subsequently amend these agreements to add additional design support services. Because this project, this agreement just gets us through that initial conceptual stage and getting us the preferred alternatives and the stakeholder buy-in. So hopefully we get that buy-in, we move forward, we get into design, and that's when we will be able to secure some state funding to help us out with that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I will say going through that was quite a roller coaster. My first impressions that were forming in my head was, well, this is really just a Band-Aid. But it also seems like pragmatically there's no cure for Peabody Creek at this point that is practical for us to pursue. So I do appreciate the creativity of looking at another, restoration project that could do something. Looking at those historical photos is really something, and then it's really unfortunate that we have a creek going through that culvert for so long that it's, not fixable at this point. I will say that my big picture brain starts thinking about, well, if we routed trucks out of downtown and then made that an open, it feels like that would be a pretty expensive project though. So, unless other people have questions, I'll just make the motion that we should approve an award of professional services agreement with Parametrics in the not to exceed amount of $149,942.30 and authorize the city manager to sign and execute the professional services agreement and to make minor modifications as necessary.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Basin, did you want to speak on this?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Councilmember French just said. There's a book from 2006 called Saving Puget Sound, and it talks about how the conservation effort, often people throw a lot of money at really expensive.
I think he's agreeing
Just trying to finish the
that
sentence. At really expensive projects that don't actually improve anything.
Right. I'm just grateful that this is coming forward, and I know it was in the CFP, but certainly it's something that's been there for a while, so I appreciate whether because it became more urgent or because we're finally moving through some projects that need to be checked off. I'm grateful that this is before us today and that we are looking at moving forward with something that will be better than what we have today. So thank you.
So I do have another comment on this, and it was, I listened to a webinar that talked about climate change and some of the potential things that we should keep in mind. And one of them is understanding that coming down the Peabody culverts, we may be getting greater amount of rainfalls due to the big storms that are coming, because they're just starting to come. And so whether that culvert currently is sized enough to be able to handle greater surges. And so one of the things that this webinar talked about, that said for every dollar we spent on expanding our culverts, we saved $200 in fixing the problems that happened because we didn't do that. So I don't know if this is going to take that into account, but I would highly suggest that knowing that there's going to be greater water coming down because of the storms that are coming, to see what we can do.
Yeah, so that hydraulic analysis, that's where that component will come in. They run those simulation models to determine the size of the culvert, the size of that full bank width. You know, if you were to open cut it, what does it look like? So we'll definitely make sure that that is factored in those analyses.
Okay. And Lindsay, I hear you're back.
I thought while I was talking and I don't know whatever.
That's okay. Mike finished your sentence for you.
Which sentence? I talked for a while.
You were talking about the book that talked about large expensive projects and that we're, going to not actually fix the problem, I assume.
Yeah, and that, if we just throw a bunch of money at Peabody Creek when there's other better options nearby, we're doing that same mistake of, not choosing low-hanging fruit. But I did want to say that I hope that the staff and parametric continue to keep the open channel option as a research option through this consulting project so that we know what that cost would be, have that information for the future if that becomes a project that we want to pursue at some point.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. All the stakeholders are going to be requiring that we do that and show that work.
Thank you. Are there any more comments?
Just really quick, one thing that we're about to talk about legislative priorities, and one of the legislative priorities that the AWC, Association of Washington Cities, has had for some amount of time is state funding to fix culverts. And one of the points that they've tried to get across to state legislators is it really does matter about the whole watershed. Replacing one culvert where there's two others blocking it doesn't actually help fish habitat, but taking that comprehensive approach to a watershed and saying, hey, the state's fixing this culvert, we can fix these two, and we can actually open up habitat. That's a much better approach, so I appreciate that we're taking that approach, and we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is, as far as that's what we're telling the state they should do. So, good work.
And I would hope that this project may become a legislative priority, because Lincoln, if there's been one project that has given me nightmares, it's been this one. It was the idea of having sinkholes all the way down Lincoln because we know water is flowing through there, and the sewer that broke, like I said, it's just been the one thing that has sometimes not let me sleep. I'm thinking, oh my God, it's just going to sink, right? I know it's kind of silly. But by Red Lion, when we found that big sinkhole, and when people were telling me, oh, we can see daylight as we're walking up the sidewalk, that just does not instill any kind of security. So I am glad this becomes you guys' problem. As I leave, I will sleep a lot. But I do hope that this actually does get added potentially to the legislative priorities to get some money to cover that $3 million cost, because it's going to cost us.
There's a unique environment down there that is a side note of what we're talking about. I grew up on Peabody Creek. We used to actually walk down to the city pier through the culvert pipe. Probably wasn't the best idea when you get older and you think about it. But that was our mode of transportation to get anywhere, was down through Peabody Creek. We had trails all over the place. And to find something like that within our city to be able to preserve it would be nice. And, I don't think that, I'm not too concerned Lincoln Street's gonna cave in, but I would only imagine the cost to remove that culvert and the potential of buildings caving in when you take it down. So that, it runs awfully close to a very tall building at the corner down there at front, or First and Lincoln.
And actually, that's a great point, Mike, that you bring up. I mean, it could even be a tourist attraction, right in the ground. In some ways, if it can be done, safely. So maybe potential more than just serving for water transport, maybe. It can be the shortcut through the neighborhood, I don't know. However it can be done, I think it's actually a great potential to have multiple uses.
We'll have to check with our insurance company.
All right, so we have a motion on the table and a second to approve this. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so now we will go back to our legislative priorities. And that is I-1.
Madam Mayor and Council, this is an item that staff presented to Council recognizing that we do have an opportunity through Association of Washington Cities Legislative Action Days coming up in January, where we have an opportunity to speak with our legislatures to talk about the city's legislative priorities. As you've noted in your memorandum on page I-1, staff has listed a number of considerations relative to legislative priorities. In particular, I think it's important to point out that this is not a year for large monetary asks because the budget is set. At this point, there might be room for some small dollar amount asks. But at this time, we also feel it's important to probably reduce the content. And I don't want to speak for the council members that attended legislative priority days in Olympia last year with me. Part of it was canceled, but we did go back and get to meet with our legislature. But I think one of the things we found was we had far too many priorities on our sheet. I think it makes sense to reduce some of those priorities. As well as it's really important that we take the time to thank our legislature for all that they accomplished in 2019, recognizing that a number of things that they implemented actually really paid off for the city of Port Angeles, including House Bill 1923, where our Community and Economic Development Department was successful in getting a $50,000 grant, as well as House Bill 1406, and Council was successful putting a ballot measure on that actually implemented a component of that ensures we've got better funding for housing. So big thank yous, I think, are really important. I do think from a timing perspective, it's important. I really want to be cognizant, though, of as of tonight, we do have a new majority coming on council in the new year, and for that reason, I think it might be best to leave the majority of that conversation to the new year, knowing that we'll have 4 new council members, but also wanted to start the discussion, knowing too that we have at least 3 elected council members in the audience. It's a great time to start looking at the city's legislative priorities, looking at this packet item, and getting familiar with what was proposed previously and see what items you might want to move forward in the future.
Thank you. Council.
I appreciate the staff recommendations, and I do think, particularly in a 60-day legislative session, we don't want to come in with a bunch of big asks. I like the informational components that have been recommended that aren't necessarily asks, but here's what's happening. Here's some things that we're talking about. I would say I would like to throw out for council consideration, we may know more by January, but long-term, Clallam Transit does stand to have to make some reconsiderations. If funding that was lost due to the passage of 976 isn't restored. And so from a city perspective, I think it would be worth us supporting an ask for at least a consideration for how they might go about doing that. A key component, a key piece is we were planning to move forward in the new year with starting a midday straight shot, which has been asked for by a lot of community members, and we now have accepted a grant for 3 new cushy buses that hold luggage and the whole bit. So I think we'll have more capacity and potentially greater demand. And without that state funding, we can't start a midday straight shot. So I think there's some practical considerations from the city's perspective to supporting a request for restoration of funding, state funding for Fallon Transit.
I would like to draw attention to fully fund the Public Works Trust Fund and give a little background for the newly elected and newer council members. It's a Public Works Trust Fund. It was set up as a trust fund to be an exclusive financial fiduciary responsibility to the cities. What it was is a very low cost loan fund, so the cities could borrow money and we could build roads and infrastructure and pay it back at a very low cost, and other cities would do the same thing. So we paid the money back, but it was low cost so we could use it for important infrastructure. When McCleary decision hit like a bomb in the legislature and asked for billions more dollars, so the legislature started looking for additional money, and although they're not set up, they weren't supposed to touch the trust fund, they swept it and took that away from the cities. The low-cost infrastructure loan took it away from the cities. It was never meant to be taken away from us. So it needs to be revisited. We want it back, and now it costs us a lot more if we need a loan for streets or special infrastructure. That it costs all of us more. So all the cities have taken a big hit on this. So I'm just giving you a little background and saying it's supposed to be ours, rightfully set up to be ours. That's why it's called the trust fund. So that's something that we should continually to ask to be restored, because it's been very hard on all of the cities to lose that low-cost funding. Thank you. Anybody else? Lindsay?
So I'll jump in here. I agree with Councilmember Kidd about the Public Works Trust Fund. It is something that is in the AWC legislative priorities for 2020, as it always seems to be in the AWC's priorities. And I also agree with Manager West about we have too many priorities, and on the practical level, we really get to one or two when we talk to our representatives, and that's really what they're looking for from us. So as much as we want to say a lot in this, we really should bring it down to not just one page, but one side of the piece of paper, not two sides. So with those thoughts in mind, I would suggest that we say, ensure like we support, AWC's legislative priorities, and we can leave it at that. AWC has its own lobbyists working to do that, and being able to say City of Port Angeles emphasizes this is important. On that same thought, I also recently got to review the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance legislative priorities. And I'd like to suggest that we also say that we support the 2020 Housing Alliance Lead Support Agenda, so that they've got the support of the city behind them. Some of those things are things that we've talked about in the past, such as for-cause evictions and kind of renter control that a number of cities have started to implement locally. I think it would be more valuable and maybe more efficient for the state to adopt those statewide. And so signing on with the Alliance or the Washington Housing Alliance agenda would be helpful for doing that. So I recognize I'm adding something here while also saying we need to cut back. But that's I think kind of where it's at. It supports a lot of our housing stuff in a budget year or in a non-budget year where a lot of this is more about policy making and about where these funds go. On the funding note, I would like to say that we should continue to support the Waterfront Center, although I don't know how effective that would be in our agenda for this legislative session. So I'm wondering if it doesn't make sense to put that in now. That's a question that other people may have a better answer to. Thanks.
All right, I got a bunch. So specifically on the Waterfront Center, well, before I saw this council memo, I had a little list on my phone of what are the things that when we start talking about legislative priorities, am I going to want to highlight? Number one is the Waterfront Center. Number two is the Chamber of Commerce's, downtown Port Angeles Renaissance group that actually encompasses the Waterfront Center, but is talking about all the private investment that's happening in downtown Port Angeles, and asking the state to, recognize that public investments need to be made appropriately as well. With regard to the Waterfront Center, I believe they're still basically, they had a request in the budget last year, and our state, I'm not going to point fingers and blame, but basically I think that the state thought that they got what they wanted, but really what they had gotten was a competitive grant and not actual funding from the state. So I think they're still trying to chase that down, so I really think we should highlight that they deserve their ask from what they got last, that I don't really feel like they got it last year. They got money that they had worked for in a competitive grant process. I would think that we would want to have 3 or 4 at most, one being AWC, which I think AWC, we can use that part of the conversation to highlight transit, because that's one of AWC's priorities. And we can use that item to highlight housing, because that's one of AWC's priorities. And then I think R3 should be the Downtown Renaissance, which encompasses the Waterfront Center. And then, maybe it's only 3. And then the last would be that thank you for the legislative assistance in 2019, which I really think is an important thing for that relationship building. One thing I'll point out, as Nathan mentioned, we had House Bill 1406 is what spurred us to add a ballot measure that was a successful sales tax increase to support affordable housing construction. On House Bill 1406, which was the impetus for us putting that measure on the ballot, Proposition 1, both Mike Chapman and Steve Theringer were sponsors of that bill originally. So their legislative action really is going to make a big difference, and we should highlight that, and that's a way for us to continue to ask for that support on housing. But I really think that those, keeping it simple and really focused is what I would like to see. So it's really just thank you for your legislative assistance on House Bill 1406 in 1923, highlighting that helped us move our community forward with funding for affordable housing. Downtown Renaissance, highlighting the Waterfront Center, and then AWC priorities, highlighting both housing and transit.
Yes. So I agree with you to some extent, because I do think, I'm hoping that we can get letters out that we can sign and get them out before the end of the year to all our legislators and say thank you for everything that they've done for us, because they really have pulled a lot of money for us. I know this is not a budget year, so I'm hoping that the council can remember some of the stuff of the following budget year. Because I think that, I know I keep, biosolids is not something pretty to talk about, but it's, I think, something that's really important. And so, like I said, not at this time, but in the future, we really need to figure out what we're doing with our biosolids. Right now, we're spreading them on our land as compost. And I know some of us, and even some staff, are not using that because of some of the things that may be in there that we don't want to consume, because plants will uptake some of this stuff. But right now we're spreading in our land, and I would hate to find out that in the future we've actually made things worse by spreading stuff. Anyway, so it's one of those things that the biosolids, the pyrolysis thing would take care of. It would turn it all into inert biochar, and I think that's something that would be useful for the city to do. The Waterfront Center, I think, is so they're asking for funds for that, but yet it's not a funding year, right? So
I think they're chasing their funding from last year still, which that is a strategy that worked for VMO a couple of years back, when their funding request was kind of messed up because it was a confusion about the Boys and Girls Club and which facilities we went. And that works for them in the off year.
Yeah. And I also know that the Boys and Girls Club still need some funds, so that's another one that I would love to make sure that it doesn't get forgotten. So I agree with the Public Trust Fund, and I agree that that's because it's AWC, that makes sense. I do like the idea of both AWC and the Housing Alliance. It seems like, they are pushing the same thing. It's just supporting them, letting them know that I'm sure they're going to hear from them. So at least knowing that we are giving them their support that way. And I would also I don't know, make them, I know that, I don't know if they're aware of our code update, but I think that's a really big deal that no other city is doing. I think they need to know that. But I don't know how, you know.
I would just say other cities.
A
Well,
complete
part of
update
what
on that?
this, Olympia, absolutely.
Are they? Well, okay.
2 years ago. Well, actually, it's ironic because Olympia's did it before House Bill 1406 was passed, and so they weren't immune to the Growth Management Board challenges that they subsequently had to litigate. I could be wrong on some of those details, but I'm pretty sure.
Well, then it looks like.
That was 1923.
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, that was 1923.
All right, thank you. But yeah, like I said, so there's lessons learned in Olympia, and again, some of the thank yous for that. So I'm hoping that the council can say it's okay to have staff help draft those letters so we can sign them and get them off before the end of the year with a thank you and for their work. Does that seem okay with the council?
And I do appreciate that coming back for new council members have input is really important. And I'll also say that I must be the lone voice that is not really thinking that the Public Works Trust Fund is important, but maybe we can have that debate another day. When it was set up in the 1980s, interest rates were over 13%. We live in a different world. I understand why it's not the highest priority for the state.
The council member French should probably review the AWC priorities and also include tax and financing, which I know he has some opinions about. But I want to provide some more background on why we should also include the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, and not just rely on AWC's housing agenda. This is from my perspective as a member of the Legislative Priorities Committee for AWC. The Housing Subcommittee for the Legislative Priorities Committee did suggest to AWC to support the for-cause eviction bill, which basically requires a landlord to have a legitimate business purpose to evict somebody. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the entire Legislative Priorities Committee did not support that bill, and so that is not part of AWC's agenda. That is part of the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance agenda. So I would say that that agenda is more bold and more supportive of measures to support renters and other low-income homeowners than AWC's agenda. But that's part of just the process of AWC being a much larger association and having a lot of different interests at play. I think for us in our community, and this came up in one of our consent agenda items, we're a lower income community than the state average. I think it's important that we support the policies that support our constituents. And that's why I'd like to see Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance lead the support agenda as part of our legislature.
Okay. Lindsay, would you be willing to forward that to current and incoming council members for information? So we can...
Yeah, I will send it to Terry.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll also say that I think Lindsay is most likely right. I'm going to have to read all the details, but their lead agenda, their first thing is about investing $10 million into the Housing Trust Fund for preservation of affordable homes. One of the ways that Bellingham was able to leverage their sales tax that they passed a few years ago that's similar to our Proposition 1 was through both the federal and the state housing trust funds. So making sure that those have available funds for those kind of grants is really important for us to be able to spend our money in the most efficient manner.
All right, so staff, is that enough discussion? Do you need a motion in one way or another, or?
Council, I don't feel like we need a motion at this point in time. Anyway, we will be bringing it back on January 7th. Another item we'll probably bring back is by then we should have a little bit more information on the North Olympic Legislative Alliance and some of the outcomes from those different committee meetings. I know some of those have been moving too fast for staff to keep up with. I think others. Allison Brecky has been representing the city on one, and Thomas Hunter has been representing us on the transportation one. We can provide more information on those at that time, but we haven't seen the final list yet. I don't believe it's been finalized yet, but we should probably have that close to the January 7th meeting.
And do we need to write letters now, or just wait till January?
Council, it's up to you. If it's important to get letters out, I think from a time frame perspective, we are pretty overwhelmed between now and the end of the year. And, but if that's something council desires, we'll make it happen.
I mean, I don't think there's a rush, but I just was wondering whether for the legislators, is it better to give them something when they have some time to read it, or they're going to be packed? It doesn't matter.
I'm guessing they won't read it between now and then either, because we're not going to send it to their home. We're going to send it to their office. So we'll give them a break and send it in January.
They're gonna do Christmas too.
All right, well, in that case, I think we're done with that topic, unless anybody else wants to add anything else? No? Okay, council committees, council outreach, and council compensation. So, this was the result of the think tank that we didn't quite finish it. So, the council committees, you'll note that you received on the dais a list of all the committees, and there's a committee summary with that. So the one that has all the notes show all the committee summaries, and there's a council rep, the time, the location, and frequency, and then the committee itself. So I had asked folks to please summarize your committees so that we can have a handoff to the next council, because you may not be serving on the same committee. So what you see right now are the committees that have been summarized. I went ahead, you know how we have our server space? I went ahead and put down all the documents of the committees that I served under, the yearly plans and yearly wrap-ups, some of the agendas. For the disability boards, there's the Excel spreadsheets to show the cost, how they're going. Anyway, so all the information that would be useful for somebody else to take over the committees I've been there is in that folder. So if you have information from your committees that would be useful to pass on to somebody else, at this point, I would suspect that they need to go to staff, probably Carrie.
Madam Mayor, that is correct. Carrie is collecting those. We have received some written updates at this point, but not all of them, and we will be happy to pass those along. As soon as we have all of them, we'll distribute them to the new council.
I also wanted to make a couple of corrections which I mentioned before, but not followed up with to actually get corrected in the document. So I'll say them again and then I'll follow up. Clown Transit now meets on the third Wednesday at 10 a.m. And Faro meets on the third Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. And on the council committee summary, it was Jim Moran as the council rep, but I am in fact the council rep. And you can see I didn't get my summary done because it's blank.
Okay. So like I said, I believe everybody's been emailed these documents, so correct them and hand them over to Carrie so that she can collate the whole last corrected one. So like I said, those documents, don't forget to remind the new council that, or just the new council know that those documents are in our server space under committees 2019. So.
What governs which committees that we appoint council members to?
So currently that discussion is scheduled for the second meeting in January, which I believe is January 21st.
Okay.
To some extent, the council rules of procedures governs it, but ultimately what we will ask for is council members to submit their interest in the different committees, and I believe what we've traditionally done is if there are conflicts where you have multiple council members requesting the same committee, I believe that the mayor acts as a tiebreaker on some of those issues and helps sort out committee assignments.
Well, so like on specific, like our committees, lodging tax, and there's RCW sometimes, and there's city code for like parks and Rec beautification. For other assignments, do we just get, sometimes it's in that organization's bylaws.
Or on the will. So, and you're right about that. Does someone who's left us in a trust, belonging part of a trust, do they have a right to say, hey, Mayor, you must attend this, from here for the next 100 years, or till ever that trust is available? And the same thing with the city manager. He goes to the K.O. Erickson. So his time is being used up by someone who left that money. I mean, and trusts are great because they do help widows and they do help some dental stuff, but I don't believe that a council member is necessarily the best person to serve. I know that I would like someone to take over the Lords of Trust who knows how to run a trust and makes sure that the funding that gets spent makes that trust fund survive well at the same giving rate sustainably for the future. And I think that that's something that, you know, that hasn't really been looked at that much. You know, we've just changed some of the financials, the building needs to be updated. So there's things like that. So I think if the council appoints someone, I think that would suffice, but that's just, that would be something for you guys to decide.
And council, just to reiterate, I would agree with that. I think it's important to look at all of the assignments. And ultimately, at the end of the day, on the 21st of January, it is a council decision to actually officially make a motion that enacts those committee assignments. Once that's done, we'll distribute letters to different entities to say this is now the city's representative to this committee. A good example is the mayor represented us on the Marine Resources Committee. Well, the county is going to want to see a letter verifying that city council authorized that assignment. And there's a number of other ones like that, but that is anticipated for January 21st.
And what I'd like, I guess, maybe potentially more important is the folks who are leaving council to talk about the committees that they've served on to see whether they are worthwhile doing or not. So Sherry, I don't know if you want to start with the committees that you've attended, whether you think that they're worth it or not. Do you want to speak to the committees that
Every committee I've served on was worthwhile, and absolutely, it's an important part of my work. So I have never served on any committee I didn't think was absolutely worthwhile, and including the Erickson Trust. It was an honor. You're serving with local judges and clergy, and you're just this is a time-honored tradition, and it's good networking and relationships, and it's an honor for the mayor to serve on that. So I've always had a very positive experience on all my committees.
Okay, Mike?
So before the Solid Waste Advisory Committee is better filled with a staff member who is an expert in that field. You know, when it comes to the intricate workings of garbage, I'm not sure that a council member is, I mean, if you want to know how to haul it, where to haul it, and what to do with it, I could tell you that, but the intricate part of it, no idea. And it meets every month now.
No, it meets every month.
Yeah, but it's, you know, I know Tom is there all the time, and, you know, that's his field of expertise.
So potentially not having a council member, but maybe a staff.
And that's a county board, right? So they might have county code that says it's got to be this. That's
They might, but again, council gets to decide who wants to represent them.
Okay.
Well, not always. So I'm next, so I can, are you done?
Well, the pool board is, I don't think needs explanation. That's a joint between the city and the county.
Yeah, so I was going to say, the city council has some capacity to, we can request a column transit every 4 years, goes through a process to decide whether we want to keep the makeup of the board the same or not. Every participant can request a meeting sooner than 4 years if they would like to request a change to the makeup, but barring that, we send two council members in order to participate. And I think it has to be an elected official. It can't be staff. I mean, we can send staff if they wanted to go, but they can't be voting members. And there's some bylaw reasons why I don't think I see any time in the foreseeable future Clown Transit changing the structure, because I won't get into it. Anyway, I don't see that happening. Pharaoh is required by their, I don't know if it's we required or they're required, but we have an honorary position on the board.
And that one makes sense that it's on city property.
Yeah, And I think it's been helpful. There's been some stuff that's come up that we've talked about that it's been helpful to have me there to clarify this, what we were talking about, and be able to answer questions. And then Utility Advisory Committee, I was talking to Greg and Thomas over the last week after the last meeting, and so I think we might have some conversation about what that looks like and whether there might be a more efficient way for us to operate, particularly when it comes to efficient/effective, particularly when it comes to citizen participation, because often this year we've ended up with 1 citizen and 3 council members and a bunch of staff, and then it doesn't feel like we get the same kind of we don't get this, the recommendation to council doesn't, in my mind, mean as much when it's been recommended mostly by council members anyway. We do get into it a little bit more, so I think we do need council on it because I think there's some policy implications about what's happening, particularly because we start the cost of service analysis process with utilities, and so that's useful. But I think we might be able to change it and make it a little more effective. So I will come back with more information about that as that conversation progresses.
I'll get through, well, actually, Mike, do you want to go through some of yours?
Yeah, I talked about mine. Let me see. Growth manager steering, as I noted in my notes, I don't think we need to appoint anyone anymore. Like, that's done. We updated the countywide planning policies, and I don't think they're going to be up for debate for another at least 5 years. Olympic Peninsula Tourism Commission, I've recommended before that we should probably send a staff member and a council member because it's kind of a mix of, you know, different jurisdictions. It seems like most of the people that are there are not elected. They're appointed staff members, which I think that it is helpful to have elected officials at, you know, when you're talking about these things because, anyway, I do think it's an important thing. I do think that we should send council members. I do think we should also send, you know, often I get asked questions that are really a staff level question. I tell them, I email Ben, I don't know, or email, you know. And so that's a tricky one. It's also difficult because sometimes, you know, they have a meeting and cross the canal bridge. And, you know, I have not made any of those yet. So they move around. They do have a good amount of them in Swim and Port Angeles, so I find it really helpful to do that coordination with regional people that are in the tourism industry. Like I said, it's tough because it does seem a lot of the stuff is staff level, so it's kind of this weird, occupies weird space. Downtown Association, I also have comments that I don't think that we need to assign a council member permanently. I just in my council report, I'll mention the last board meeting that was actually somewhat well attended, but typically I'm at a meeting with 3 people, including myself, sometimes 4. And so I don't think that's a useful use of my time. Staff has stopped sending a staff member, which I think is a wise decision because again, if it was a situation where there was 20 downtown merchants in a room, we would have a really effective way of communicating. And I think that in the past, that's probably how some of the board meetings were. I remember going to board meetings and seeing Sherry there, and there were 20 people in the room. So that was probably a useful way to communicate with downtown merchants and hear from downtown merchants what their concerns are. That's not what my experience has been in the last 2 years. PA Forward, I do think that it is as useful as the projects that come to it are. If there are not projects to review, then it's not useful. In the past, there were like a lot of projects lately that we've been mostly focused on the way the Chamber of Commerce has been the most productive appointment I've had by far. And that just is a result of the Chamber kind of in the last 5 years or so becoming a really effective organization by themselves. And it's also really, that's a meeting where often I will, either if I can see the agenda that has something on it, I'll often like have a short conversation with Nathan about, stuff that's going to come up at the meeting, and we can not necessarily, we can be on the same page as to what the city's message should be to the business community, and I often get good criticism from the business community that I can then bring back to Nathan, and we can have conversations about it, and so that's been really helpful. Trust Sense Advisory never met, and I was never contacted. I don't know if they meet. I don't know.
Lindsay?
Yeah, so, Clone Transit, I agree with Kate's statements. Next year is the year when one of the Port Angeles representatives will be the chair. So I think it's valuable for longevity. And assuming that Kate wants to continue in Clone Transit, I certainly do as well. And, you know, just like, as a council member, there's a learning curve with committees as well. So my preference would be to stay on the committees that I'm on transit included. Let's see, then Peninsula Regional Transportation Planning Organization. I appreciate the mayor taking a lot of that for this year, and I would be happy to continue to serve on that. One of my goals, if that's the case, would be to try to fulfill, you know, what the mayor emphasizes in these comments, better coordination between the technical meetings and the executive meetings. The chair of the technical advisory committee even suggested that, you know, executive members should probably just sit in on the technical meetings. I'll see if my schedule allows for that. That was my intent starting out. And then the Strait Ecosystem Recovery Network is still not on the list, but I am an official city representative for that. And that's a meeting that really is about allocating Puget Sound Partnership funds into regional projects in the Strait Ecosystem Recovery area, or however the Puget Sound Partnership talks about it in its acronym soup. And we as the city haven't really seen much benefit from that, although I will say that FutureWise's Green Links project is funded from that as direct benefit to the city, because it's specific to the city. So it's not fair to say that we're not seeing, we as a city haven't been funded from it. It's the sort of thing where I feel like there would be value in having staff, and at the same time the meetings are pretty long, quarterly meetings. And so what I tried to do is just, you know, bring it up with Nathan after a meeting or before a meeting and make sure like I'm not missing anything between staff and council coordination. And that probably makes sense into the future. In terms of the utility advisory committee, I agree with the comment that it's council member heavy, and we could probably do with even just one council member on that. In that same vein, I think it would make sense for us to have council members on every one of the advisory committees, so that we have better coordination between the advisory committee and the council, and the ability to speak to what happened at the advisory committee in council discussions. So I would support, you know, if we could, even just one council member in UAC, and also thinking about how council members should be on all the different department advisory committees. I've also been involved, although this isn't on the list, in the Port Angeles Business Association Government Affairs Committee, along with Councilmember Kidd, and that's been really helpful as well, and the same reason that Councilmember French spoke about the chamber. And then also I want to put a plug in for the AWC Legislative Priorities Committee. That committee, as I mentioned earlier, needs a subcommittee with the issue areas, basically each of the different agency lobbyists has a different subcommittee. And so there's room for more representatives from Port Angeles City Council within that without us being overlapping or kind of being on the same subcommittee, although that's a possibility as well. I think it's a great opportunity to kind of connect the local to the state operations, and I found most of those interactions with AWC staff are always beneficial and very educational. Let's see. And the other thing to mention too is the OLECAP board has some positions for elected officials, although I don't think they want that specifically to be always city officials. So it's not specifically a request that they have that a city of Port Angeles council members on the board. But those are some optional things that I think are worth thinking about as we look at this process. I guess my request going into January would be that new council members look at what things they're interested in, and you know, if we could also consider in the process, kind of if existing council members want to stay on their committees, giving them kind of first option to do that. I would appreciate that process moving forward.
Thank you. So I'll speak to the ones, so I was assigned for city wellness. Apparently this has been meeting, but was not included, not a big deal, but I think they're doing well without us. Then the next one was the disability board. This is probably the quickest meeting I've ever been into. You know, most meetings last 5 minutes, seriously, sometimes 10, but that's a long one. And we meet quarterly, and then it's via email, and so that's one really efficient meeting. It's just a matter of get there and out of the place. The next one is the Firemen's Pension Board. This was one time in 2 years that we met for 20 minutes and listening to the board, and that's an easy one. Then after that, the Lords and Trust. Yes, it's an honor to serve on this thing, but it is, I think, it doesn't take, it is a building that is in trust, and so I think it just needs someone who really cares for it. I think that council, if you want to assign someone, you could, but I don't know. We have a meeting, I mentioned that to the board before, and see whether that can get changed or not. The Lodging Tax Advisory, I think this is one of those great committees that someone needs to love this stuff, because it needs that. The Marine Resources Committee is a really interesting one. So we have Brad Collins served on it since its inception, way back when. And then when I took over, he kind of really wanted to stay on. This is one that you really need to love the topic. It's citizen scientists, and they really do all sorts of really cool things. Crowd outreach. Their top 3 priorities were issues on climate change, plastics and toxics in the ocean, and then oil preparedness, oil transportation and preparedness for emergencies. So the reports are on the web, but I think this is another one that I talked to Brad, because the committee said, hey, can you talk to Brad to see if he can be as an alternate, or if he can be, everybody come back. Brad said he would be able to start serving in this committee in March if council wanted him or not, but so that will be up to council to decide. The North Olympic Development Council is one where we met the new city manager from Port Townsend, who was there. This one's got amazing potential. There's a lot of projects that are starting to come out of there. Broadband, climate change. It is like our council of governance, and it takes. I feel like what we put in is what we'll get out. And so if we don't put anything in, we're not getting anything out. But if we put in stuff, this one has. I would highly recommend someone who is energetic and wants to work on this one to take it. It's really good. Then the next one that the PRTPO, Lindsay talked about that. Actually, he's the main guy. I don't know why I put myself there first. So, and then the Volunteer Firemen's Pension Board. The Volunteer Firemen's we never met with, so I don't believe that that's the same one as the firemen. Yeah, so that one's, and that's it. So that, I'm hoping that gives some background to the committee members and for the future committees, so you guys can take on the future. So the second.
Can we clarify the EDC one as well, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. The EDC one was Jim. So that one I don't have any information on. So. All right, the next part of this is the council committee outreach, and you also have a handout at the back of that list of all the committees. There's the outreach, and I thought that maybe it might be worthwhile just to spend, everybody spend 2 minutes to say, was it worth going to these things or not? Did you spend a lot of time sitting around or not? So we begin at the farmer's market, and I know those are hot and cold. Sometimes we had a lot of people. Sometimes we didn't. Then the next one's the high school, and I love the high school. I thought the high school was a great.
I agree. I really enjoyed going to the high school.
I did too when I went.
And it seems like that's a worthwhile thing to do. Peninsula College, I was there once or twice. I also liked that one. And I wish we had actually more of that, because I think this is where I think we can make a huge difference and get these kids involved. The library, I put a little input for the percentage of time spent. There was very little input. I mean, I think in all the days I sat, maybe 2 or 3 people, if that. So that was, I think, a lot of time for nothing. Now, the senior center, it's a wonderful place to go to, but you cannot sit there and wait for folks to come to you. You must get out, and you must walk around and meet them, and then they'll sit there and chat with you. And so that is one that I would suggest you continue, but if you're not willing to go out there, then don't go. Because I think that's my experience from these.
So I was just going to recommend, because I don't think it's worth spending too much time talking about them, which isn't what you're asking us to do. Just because we have new council members coming, but for the incoming council members to think about where we are now. Are there places that you think would be useful so that we can have a good conversation about that when you guys get started? Because you may have, some of these are ideas that we came up with that weren't on the list before, and you guys might have other ideas as well. So.
One that was a really good venue for both Lindsay and I was speaking to the Port Angeles Realtors Group. I know that we spoke to them once. I think he might have spoke separately to them once, and I think Jim actually spoke to them once. And they had a fairly large group that was fairly, obviously they understand housing, we talked a lot about, and they were fairly engaged. And I thought it was a really good opportunity to have, back and forth. We were able to provide them information, and they were able to provide us information. But I also agree that the library was probably not worth it, and I don't think the farmer's market is necessarily worth it, but I'm also unable to go in many of the summer months when it's busy in my restaurant.
And then the last one is council member compensation. I bring this up again since council was the last received a raise in 2008. If you look at the sheet behind the memo, it shows all the compensation. The one thing to take a look is that second column that says, third column, that says council per month. That takes all, not the mayor, whether it's a strong mayor or a weak mayor, but all the councils. The average salary for the councils was $657 per month. And so that's something, ours is $550. If you look at just a council manager style, then we are just $54, $4 lower, or $50, $4.50 lower. But I still believe that, I truly believe that council needs to get a raise, and I think the mayor needs to get a raise. Obviously, I will not going to gain a cent out of this thing, but I think it's important that we invest in the people and to know that it is if staff continues to get a raise, you're not doing this for the money, but it needs to cover your costs of childcare, of things like that. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that, and I open it for council discussion.
So I think we had a lot of support for this when we talked about it last time. And just as a clarification, it was clarified for us by staff that if we were to approve a raise tonight, it can go into effect for the council members who will be coming on, but it cannot affect the council members who are voting on it. So just to be clear that we would not be voting right now to give ourselves a raise. That's important clarification. I will say I certainly didn't go into it for the money, and I have found that it has made some employment opportunities challenging for me in a way that I did not anticipate. And so I think that's just something that I think is worth mentioning when we think about who has access to be on council and what it means to make that decision. So at least 2 jobs I applied for, the decision was it would just be too complicated for me to be in this position and to be in that position. And so when we think about having good representation at the table, I think making sure that we are paying enough to cover costs for babysitting if someone needs that, to cover the expenses of leaving work if you need to not get paid for that hour because you've left work, to go to your committee meetings. I think if we don't consider those things, then we run the risk of getting back to a council that is only people who really can afford to do it, and I don't think that's exactly the kind of representation that we want. I think they can do a good job, but I think we get better representation if we can at least compensate some for the cost of being here.
Right.
Just wanted to point out that the council members serving the city of Forks, and many of them for years and years, receive no compensation except, I believe, mileage. And if you live in Forks, you don't need mileage. But city of Sequim council members get $150 a month. So it just, when people run for this office, they know what the compensation is. It's just disappointing once they're elected, they start asking for a raise. So anyway, people that run for this office are aware of the compensation when they run.
And that argument basically says, you're not even going to adjust that compensation for cost of living, which is a little outrageous. I think the argument that Deputy Mayor Dexter put together, basically, the concept of opportunity costs and opportunity for working families with Port Angeles to have representation, are a good reason to account for the investment in the service that is City Council. I refer to City Council as AmeriCorps Light because back in 2002 and 2003, when I was an AmeriCorps volunteer, I had a bigger stipend than I get at City Council.
And I guess I'd also like to point out, I know that Sequim and Forks are not on our list because this is just for cities 15,000 to 29,000. So it kind of equates, Port Angeles has a whole lot more things going on than Forks does as to what the council's dealing with. And so I think that that's also the amount of time that our meetings take and then the amount of committees. So I would continue to advocate that the council get a raise.
Can you go ahead.
I think that just from a pragmatic position, it really matters what numbers we're talking about. It would help me is what are you thinking? Are you talking a $50 raise? Are you talking a $200 raise? Because obviously I'm not going to support a $200. You know what I mean? Just to put some real numbers around this thing. We're talking about basically, I'm not going to support any motion made tonight on this. To be clear, we have a budget that we passed for next year, and I'm not going to make financial decisions to change it. So we're talking, if we at next meeting or whatever made a motion to raise council salaries, we're talking about whoever's elected 2 years from now, and then whoever's elected 4 years from now would be getting some amount of a raise.
Right, so that's if we don't do anything tonight.
If we don't do anything tonight.
That's true. And I would say, just to put numbers around this, I would give both council and mayor a $100 raise.
Okay.
So it would make them $650, which is below the average, and it would make the mayor $750, which is just a hair above the average as well.
And again, that's years from now where the averages might change. I mean, it would be easy for me to accept a $50 raise.
Because if you do it tonight, then we'll make it 50. I mean, I'm serious. I think this council needs a raise. If we don't do it now, it is 2 years from now for the next council, and then 2 years after that.
So asking our budget director, is a $50 raise going to do anything to our budget? I'm sure the answer is no.
It would be minimal, yeah.
This is what we call budget dust.
Yeah.
I mean, this is council. Anyway, so is $50, I mean, like I said, I would compromise if $50 was enough. We just need some.
I have a clarifying question because somewhere I saw, and I can't find it in front of me tonight, it could be in my stack, so my apologies, the list of when, there was a list, I saw it today, I think, of when they had the date and the amount that was the last raises the council, this council had. The last one was in 2008, but there were every 2 years they did a raise for a number of years and then nothing from 2008 forward. So I mean,
I will say that it makes sense that they stopped doing raises in 2008, knowing the history of the city of Port Angeles.
Yes. It would not have been responsible.
But I take your point that they used to have practice around this where they had regularly occurring raises.
So council, just to answer that question, there were adjustments in 2004, 2006, and 2008. And just to clarify a little bit more on the budget perspective, we would anticipate, and you may want an additional legal interpretation, but right now we would anticipate that if council moved forward in the direction of an adjustment, it would, and did so tonight, it would apply to 3 council members next year.
Would it apply to the newly appointed, not yet sworn in?
Our initial interpretation on that is that no, it would not, because it's a incomplete term at this point,
Okay.
and that term continues.
Okay.
I think that's fair.
Mike?
I'm surprised at some of the reasoning on this. So, we speak of budget dust and minuscule amount, it's not gonna affect the budget. Is $50 gonna be the make and break decider whether or not somebody runs to be on council? You know, the reasoning behind that is, you know, it doesn't make much sense. And having to raise that up, and so the average council wage right now is $5.54. $6.57, I don't know if that's the average between the two or exactly what that number is, but what I'm reading is mayor is $7.37, council is $5.54. Yeah.
Yes, so to clarify, that's under the council manager for all councils, whether they're city council manager or mayor of council, the councils, the total council for average is at $6.57.
I'm not saying $50 or even $100 is going to be the decider for folks whether or not they're going to run for city council. This is, I will not disagree, a pain in the ass if you have a certain type of job. It does not work well with certain jobs in the community, and whether you have to be at that job all the time or whether or not that employer's flexible is probably the first step that you're going to look at whether or not you're going to run for council. And trying to recruit a diverse council, I think, is an uphill battle in some groups, especially in the blue-collar group. That's tough, getting folks in, and it's apparent. So, you know, if I found $550 on the sidewalk, I'm not going to step over it. But in the scope of the whole thing, it's not much compensation. And I'm not sure, well, I know that I'm not going to support enough compensation to really sway this, to make people want to jump in line. This is not a job as in your career that's paying your bills. And it wasn't, I'm not really sure I knew what the compensation was when I decided to run for this.
Same. Yeah, it's true.
And it, you know, and still even to this day, by the time the government takes their share and everything else, it actually cost me at the end of the year about $3,300. So I'm here today for very little wages, but that wasn't my deciding on this. And I think folks need to realize that, you know, everybody, I'm not going to disagree, is entitled to some kind of a raise eventually. But the reasoning for me for speaking up is that I would never support moving council wage to a point where that was a decider for somebody to run or not for council, and whether or not they would support somebody in this community. So $50 here nor there. I agree with Mike. We made a decision to pass that budget. And that if the new council decides to change that next year, and add that into the budget ahead of time, then I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that, but budget dust, yeah, I don't disagree. Burn that much idling in the park picking up garbage. So I'm sure that our fastest presenter in Port Angeles could come up with that $50.
And I guess I'd like to clarify, no, this is never meant to convince more people to run. It's just to compensate a little bit more. No, this is a labor of love for all of us. None of us are getting rich out of this. I just think that we have not, this council has not have raised since 2008, and I think it's time.
I just want to clarify quickly the statement. I think there's some nuance difference between the salary shouldn't convince someone, or the salary shouldn't be why someone runs. I think what I was trying to say, and does $50 get it there? I don't know. So is it worth waiting so we can have a more detailed conversation about it when the budget is more flexible? Perhaps. All I was saying is it would be nice to have it be enough, and what is enough, I don't know exactly, that it doesn't mean that someone absolutely can't run who really, really wants to. I think there's some nuance difference in that, and I think it's important to me to, it's not, is it enough that I want to do it because of the money, but is it enough that it doesn't keep me from being able to do it because I really want to, but can't afford. I mean, I paid for a babysitter for every council meeting the first year I was here, and I spent probably half of what I made on that. That's fine, because I wasn't counting on that money to live on, but that was a reality for me, and I think my voice is valuable on council, so I think it's worth considering those things when we talk about how much we're paying.
I just want to highlight what Kate just said, because I think we're lucky that she ran. And I think that if she knew up front what the full-time commitment was, she might not have, I don't know. Like, one of the things that happened early on is, we appointed her deputy mayor, and then I volunteered to take on extra committee assignments to help lighten the load. So there's a lot of barriers that prevent people from being able to serve in these positions. Most of them are time. They're not really money. But any amount that we can do to lessen those barriers, I think, is really helpful, because it is really important to have voices from all perspectives on the council. That's something I really absolutely agree with. But, it's tough, because like what I said at the start of this, I don't want to affect a budget that we've already passed. I still kind of agree with that. At the same time, I really do think that we should be cognizant that there are real barriers that prevent, really smart, qualified people from participating in American life. And we all lose when those barriers stay intact. I think it's I can't remember who said the quote, but it's like, I'm much less interested in what happened in Einstein's brain than I am with the knowledge that how many people toiled in fields that would have been able to have those kind of impacts. And instead their lives were wasted pulling cotton. It is about, to me, I appreciate the nuance that Kate tried to pull out of that it's not about making it worth it to someone, it's about preventing it from it absolutely not being an option. So, like I said, I don't like the fact that we just passed a budget and now we're changing the terms of it. I do agree that it's a really insubstantial number, and so I would be fine with a compromise at 50, but maybe it is a wiser choice to just leave this for the next council. And I also don't want to, anyway, I'll let other people talk.
Okay, Sherry? Sure. I don't think our timing right now is the best. It's late at the last meeting, at the end of the year, we passed the budget, now we're going to slip in a raise. I just don't think the timing is correct. I think the topic of a raise is fine. Bring it up with the new council and do it with enough time to get it into the budget, get an agreement. I just think our timing this evening isn't the best, because it's the end of the year, the budget's been put to bed. Also, it's a time commitment And that's the priority. The reason that we get a check at all is to help us with babysitting and help us with lunches and help us with things. It's a stipend. It's not a salary. It's a stipend to help us do what we need to do to get here. But there's a whole new council coming on, and the topic's been opened, and I think the discussion's out there, and I think the discussion should be continued with the new council, and then I think it will be whatever decision's made, I think it'll be better.
Lindsay, did you have any comments?
Yeah, my comment is I think Councilmember French is the deciding vote here, so he should make a motion.
Well, I was actually just going to pipe in again and say, I mean, my only concern, my argument stands about the issue of compensation. That being said, I also don't want to just pick an amount tonight for the sake of doing it. While I know it pushes it out even further, I would rather have a thoughtful conversation about real numbers that have more meaning behind them in the future, early enough to make sure it's in the budget, that we can compensate it, that it can be covered by the budget, but that it's a dollar amount that has something not tangible, but that there's actually some more thought behind it rather than just, how about $50? And I appreciate the thought behind that and just moving the needle a little bit. But I'm also okay with waiting to have a more comprehensive conversation about it. I know we've talked about it already before, a few times over the last couple of years. But I'm okay with waiting to have a more comprehensive conversation about it so that we can get a more thoughtful number.
I move to table.
Second.
All right, it has been tabled. So, we will now move on to council reports, please. So, Lindsay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, the council member pay discussion makes me feel like we're in like a medieval city or something where, who can so afford to be the town elder and, hopefully you don't get graft and corruption out of it, but, that's how past council members sometimes done it too. But, we won't go there. Council report, I want to thank Director Hunter for the additional sections that he's been putting in the council members when hiring outside professional services. That's really helpful, and I think it's moving in the direction of analyzing what we do in-house and what we don't. I'm assuming the 4 incoming council members are still in the audience, but even if there aren't, I do want to plug Association Washington City Action Days. It's January 28th and 29th. I've been fortunate to be able to attend the previous 2 years, so that probably puts me at the bottom of the list for who gets to go. And I'm hoping that enough other council members want to go that it won't be me this year, although I'm certainly excited to go if other council members don't want to attend January 28th and 29th. Let's see. I also just want to plug that the training we're doing with Ann McFarland on January 14th from 5 to 7:30, that I even think that, this discussion about committees that we've been on and even other community groups that we now have association with the city, it's a really valuable training with her on how to run meetings and how to do procedure at meetings. And, whether it's nonprofits or other organizations, we should just plug that and encourage people to attend. I mentioned before the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance. I had the opportunity last week to present on what the city of Port Angeles has been doing around housing at their annual meeting. And I did that along with some other local elected and staff officials from around the state, and then got to hear from a couple of state representatives about what they see as priorities in the legislative session for this coming year. So that was a great thing to do. I think Port Angeles has done really well on housing this last year. I want to commend the voters for that, with passing the 0.1% sales tax measure, and also I want to commend city staff and the council for passing the zoning changes that we did in November. So if there was a highlight for our work on moving forward with housing, I'd say it was what we did in November. So thank you all for being part of that. That's it.
All right, Sherry.
Thank you. So that is my report. It's about thank you. Thank you for the Port Angeles Police Department, Deputy Chief Jason Vieta. You guys are awesome, and whenever I've called, I've gotten such good response, and I see the good work you're doing in the community in so many ways. So thank you. And if anybody, and I want to talk to the new council members, go for a ride along. You're going to see, you're going to get an education. So they need to know council members are interested to go for a ride along. I went like Friday night, and it was like, wow, I had no idea. But what I was so impressed was the police officers, they know everybody in town by name, by description, who your friends are, if you've got a warrant out, where you live, where you used to live, where your ex lives. These guys are amazing. So I sleep better because I know we have a sharp police department. So I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to our fire department. Chief, you're just terrific. We have approved 4 new firemen, paramedics. Well, anyway, we have we've approved 4 new, and we've needed them because it was like 1992 was the last time we added, and it's just been a long time since we've had new personnel in the fire department. So, and we have our pilot program with the paramedics program, and so that's doing great. I'm really proud of that. And we have the small fire trucks, well, it's big ones, and hey, we're just proud of our fire department. Finance. Serena, thank you for taking that job. You're just doing amazing. But when I came here when I was elected, and I began serving in 2008, we had a skinny 10% reserves. Skinny. And I said, well, that doesn't feel real secure. Now we're up to where we should be. We're over 25%. And that shows great management of staff and council understanding that we don't want a debt pushed on us. And so, but it wasn't until the previous financial manager that he showed us the mountain of debt, because when I was new on council, they were coming out with, well, we'll do this, and it's only $5 million. Well, you know, everything was separate, and we never were shown the big picture. Now we get the big picture, and we're working, and we're climbing down the mountain of death. And we came up with that term because it was something we didn't want. So fiscal responsibility, we're rocking it. Thank you, staff, for that. And I just appreciate we have such a good staff. And Allison, my only complaint about you is I haven't seen enough baby pictures, but you've just done a great job. We really appreciate you in your department. You guys are working hard, because what's happened? Look at the pool going up. Well, that was easy. No, it wasn't. What about the new housing project going up? You know, so many things are happening, and you guys are you're just doing it. You're getting it done, and we're building a new waterfront. How do you do it 24 hours a day? I don't know, but it's awesome, so I appreciate it. So our pool's going up. So for the 12 years I've been on the council, I've had the privilege of serving on the pool commission, and that's pretty neat. Because the very first few months when I was on council, we were told they're going to shut down the pool. And the community just, whoa, got together, and anyway, now, of course, we have to expand it over 100,000 visits a year, well over. Just fabulous. So for the next generations, but we've all worked together on that, so I'm grateful. PA Forward, brand new council member, first committee assignment, chair of PA Forward. Okay, But we used to have the crummiest waterfront, and now it's just, it's fabulous and just getting better. But we had to set up the waterfront to set the foundation for development in our downtown and reinvestment in our downtown. If I had a magic wand, I'd want the waterfront center. It's like a dream beyond all dreams, and it's happening. That's so fabulous. So thank you everyone for helping with the PA Forward, and then look what's happened. We have now Port Angeles Historic District, Port Angeles Civic Historic District. So I'm proud of that. I was able to be the nominator on that project, but it's just great. So good things are happening. When I first started, when I was a candidate for city council, I went to the city manager's office and asked for a copy of the council packet. And I was told, no, we don't give those out. I said, well, I am a candidate for city council. I'd like to have it. No, we don't give those out. Well, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for the printing. Oh, we can't do that. So I kind of insisted, and then, well, I'll check and see, and then I was reluctantly given a packet. Now it's on the website. Everybody, it's on the website. Read our packets. So transparency has come a long ways, and I'm really proud of that. I've served with some really wonderful people in this council. I'm just really privileged to, and then I'm grateful for the people of Port Angeles, because when I just ran for office, and I still have, I have scars on my knuckles. I have knocked on everybody's door in town at least 3 times. And, you know, the people in Port Angeles appreciate when you show up at the front door. I'm knocking on doors. People really appreciate you showing that you care. And so I'm grateful to the people of Port Angeles. It's a wonderful town. So all I can say is thank you, everyone. We have a great town, and we've elected some new people, and it's just going to keep getting better. So thank you, council members, and thank you, Port Angeles. It's been fun.
I knew sooner or later he would cave. So I brought this book tonight. It's called Who Pooped in the Park? I'd love to read the thing, but I can't hardly see straight as it is, so everybody loves to be read to. And my eyes are so tired, you're lucky I'm going to get home. So when I started this, I wasn't really quite sure what I was doing, other than I was, being personal, tired of the same old faces. And I thought, you know, I'm going to throw my hat in there. What's the worst they're going to do? Tell you no. So in 4 years, watching staff change, some of you, some are still in the same spot, it was very enlightening to see. They may not see progress as they go along through the last 4 years, but I see progress through the last 4 years. And our city manager, West, I definitely see progress. I used to take wagers with myself sometimes whether or not he was going to lose it over there, because some days he'd start smirking over there, and I'd think he's going to lose his game face sooner or later. Chief Dubuque, I don't like cats. Sorry to tell you that. And Serena, I really do mean it when I appreciate the facts, straightforward, presented. You're the most efficient presenter of anybody I've ever met. And it keeps the pace moving, and it helps to make it more interesting when you're moving along through it. And I especially want to thank Carrie. When she was at the front, she made a point of texting me if there was something I needed to read in my email, or texting me if there was something I needed to know right away. And there were several things that would have flown right by me if she hadn't done that. So thank you for that. But it's been a whole new enlightening level of what Port Angeles is. And you don't see that until you're in here every other Tuesday night, it seems like, even if it is first and third Tuesday night. But it's hard. It's a lot of time to put in, and it is a rat race some days to get here. And if you work an irregular job, it's tough. It's a tough position to do. And there's folks that, get up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when I do, and there's folks that get up at 8 o'clock and they can't do this because they have to work till 8 o'clock at night. And that's too bad. Because I think if you have any inclination to run for any type of public office, this is a great place to start. And it's a great place to figure out the inner workings of government. A lot of people like to bitch, but nobody wants to step up and do anything. Nobody wants to make that difference. Their idea of that difference is I'm going to sit here and complain and complain and complain as long as somebody will respond back to me. And this city will continue to grow. Yes, there's the joke that last one turned the lights out, but that's not going to happen. This city has great things going for it. It has the environment that many don't, and many of us take for granted. So it is a great place to live, and it's a great place to raise your kids. And together the city will continue to grow, and I just can't thank staff enough for everything you do for council. It's not just what we do for you, but it's all of this paperwork that you guys produce for us, and questions and memos and getting everything ready to go. And to the fire chief and the police for keeping us all safe. Thank you very much. And the Parks Department, Corey, I know, we went to school together. Thank you. So yeah, great place for the kids to play ball. Nothing but compliments on all of our park facilities where folks are showing up.
All right, just one housekeeping. We had a UAC meeting in between last council meeting and this one. It was probably the shortest UAC meeting in history. It was over in 20 minutes. And we actually got some work done, so that was nice. And surprisingly, surprised to have some extra time. We had a new member, and hopefully he'll come back after the next one when he realizes they aren't all 20 minutes, because that was a fluke. And I just want to say thank you to the three of you who are leaving us after tonight. I'm sure we'll still see you. I look forward to hearing your public comment occasionally. And I just really appreciate all that I've learned working with you, and I've really had a good time with this group. And so I'm looking forward to the new folks joining us, and I'm sure that there will times when we're going to reference, now if Sherry was here, she would say, and that's going to be a fun part, way to keep your memories alive up here with us. So thank you.
Okay, like I said, I attended the Port Angeles Downtown Association meeting. We had a surprisingly large amount of people, by which I mean 8. And we had a lot of discussion about ongoing planning efforts in downtown and the future of the Arts and Drafts Festival, which I think is in question at this point. There was not a lot of meetings that I attended this last couple of weeks, but a couple of articles that I ran across that were really instructive. One is entitled "Why Homelessness is Going Down in Houston but Up in Dallas." It's reported by the Texas Tribune, and it's a fairly long article, but it has a lot of charts, graphs, pictures, and it was really, I really enjoyed it. The one quote from the Chief Development Officer for the mayor in Houston, where they've reduced, I think it was a 54% reduction in the last 8 years in homelessness from their point in time count. And he said, "This starts off with a simple dictate. The solution to homelessness is a home. Our focus was to create permanent supportive housing so that we're not continually cycling people in and out of shelters, those being temporary or even more permanent shelters." And then Dallas had a kind of opposite story where they had struggled and homelessness was increasing, mostly because of a housing crunch, where they saw the unsheltered homeless population increasing 725% from 2009 to 2019. The sheltered homeless population remains relatively stable because the number of beds at shelters has been the same. The unsheltered number is going up because the shelters are full. People don't have anywhere to go, they can't go to the emergency shelters, and the reason why the emergency shelters numbers remain the same is because housing is not affordable and people can't move out of the shelter. Dallas needs more housing, especially when it's called rehousing, and they go on. But it's a really great article if people wanted to find it, texastribune.org, and it's called "Why Homelessness is Going Down in Houston but Up in Dallas." And then the second article, something that has been of relevance to us at the city level, is a Ninth Circuit decision called Martin v. Boise. And yesterday, the Supreme Court denied certiorari, so they declined to hear the case, which let the lower circuits ruling stand. It's not usually when the Supreme Court does this, they literally don't write anything other than saying, "We deny cert." And so this is not an endorsement of that, but it settles the matter for now until another case might bring it up, so there's an article on Martin v. Boise in the Harvard Law Review. It was a blog entry from December 12th, I think, called "Martin v. the City of Boise." And they go on to talk about, how Martin v. Boise was actually a narrow ruling. For those in the audience that don't know, this was a ruling the Ninth Circuit made that said, basically, you cannot criminalize homelessness if there's nowhere else to go. So if your shelters in your city are completely full, you cannot arrest people for sleeping in a public place, because what other choice would they have? Cities saw that ruling and kind of freaked out, because a lot of cities have policies that basically criminalized homelessness people, for people being in public without, on public land. And the actual ruling is a narrow ruling, so this article goes into that, but then it says, why then does Martin matter? As the plaintiffs recognize, Boise wanted to drive homeless individuals out of the city by punishing them for staying still. This is a long-standing tactic, etc. But the case's most significant impact then was to limit cities' ability to push homeless people out. By allowing them to stay somewhere within Boise's boundaries, the panel turned homeless people into part of the city's public. And so that's a really important point, that it was actually the process of litigating Martin v. Boise that resulted in actual changes to Boise's governing structure and policies and laws that made it easier for homeless people to live in Boise, and it encouraged them to be part of the public system. So, and by that I meant the public process, the interacting with your government process. So this is something that will be a challenge for cities if they want to go down that path of criminalizing homelessness. And from a policy perspective, I think that's the wrong path. I think, again, like the previous article pointed out, the solution to homelessness is homes. But it was a really interesting article that had really great analysis of the process and of the case and of the issue as a whole in the Harvard Law Review, so if people are interested.
Thank you for that. I guess I went to the senior center today, and there was a couple of things that were brought up. One about the maintenance of the building and the outside. They would like to gather some volunteers and ask permission to please, could they wash windows and pull weeds. So the other thing was one person talked about Monroe, the street right by the school. The traffic is going really fast down there. If the crosswalk get painted, this woman actually got hit. They're just having a hard time with that intersection. And then Lordson, another one, mentioned that as you're coming up the paint is on the sides of the little islands, but not on the front of the little islands. And in the night, it's hard to see until you get the little bit of the paint that's around there. So they could paint the whole little edge of the islands. And then, it's hard to say that. So with that, I too want to thank staff. You guys have been amazing. There has been a complete turnover. I know, Corey, you were working for Parks, but in the public works direction. So every single one of you guys is different since the time it started. And it's wonderful. You know, we're in a new position. I expect only great things. You guys got an amazing staff. I think things we can do really, really well. I think we're poised to do a bunch of stuff that is unique for this community. So I expect you guys to be bold, creative, innovative, and you know, sometimes some of them won't work. Say, okay, well that didn't work, let's try it again. But don't be too cautious. You know, you can't fix today's problems with yesterday's thinking. You can't. So you gotta start thinking out of the box. And so I want you to, I guess that's my advice to you guys, to the new council members. You know, again, I appreciate the existing ones that are staying, and then I think the new ones, just go for it, you know? Just go for it. Like I said, I would say don't be afraid of asking questions. No question is a dumb question. Because if you haven't, then you need to have an answer for it, because you won't make a good decision without that. So ask away, ask as many questions as you need. And then if you see something that's not quite so flattering for Port Angeles, you need to state it. Because the first thing is identifying the problem, and then we can fix it and make this town even better. You're not criticizing Port Angeles, you're just pointing out some of the things that need changing. And that needs to happen. So please, make sure that keep your eyes open, listen to the people out there. I know you two will do really, really well, and I am very proud of this town for all the changes that it's done, and I really look forward to reading about everything you guys are doing. It's been a pleasure working for this, you know, with this council, for this council, and with staff. So thank you all. Really appreciate you. And so now, city manager report.
Madam Mayor and Council, I think it's important to start out with just thanking the entire council for all that we've accomplished this year. Thanking the staff too, knowing how much work got actually accomplished is extremely impressive for 2019, considering some of the hurdles and learning curves that we all had. I think as you are able to see it in paper, and we will hopefully have a summary coming up in the new year, I think everyone is going to be impressed with all that we were able to get done. And I'm so extremely appreciative to staff for helping out, making sure that ultimately we got goals accomplished. With that, I want to transition into a couple things that are in your council packet. One that is not, which is more of a verbal update, is an update on the American Institute of Architects. And that's something that is required by the strategic plan that we provide on a regular basis. And I'm going to do a couple highlights of that and as far as what I think is of value to council to think about for what was accomplished recently as well as this year. As council is aware, there's a number of ongoing items that come directly out of the American Institute of Architects study. And I think Community and Economic Development Director Brecky actually put it well that this plan is now 10 years old. And it's really important that we get some new plans done. But also a good reminder that this particular report was one, yes, we had representatives come in from outside our town to make recommendations, but a huge part of the recommendations, as you distill those and look at them, were actually recommendations put together by the local community over years before. They examined every prior plan, and they really pulled out the great things of some of those prior plans to get to where they got. And so I think it's important to remember that, and remember that as we move forward with future planning processes, we don't have to start from scratch. But talking about some of those ongoing items, one that I want to highlight that Community and Economic Development is really moving forward with is since the inception of the facade improvement program, which was an AIA recommendation, over 82 grants have been awarded with an ability to actually leverage over $1 million in investments to buildings in our community. And to me, that's a really big deal to see that program continue to be successful and be meaningful. Obviously, Waterfront Phase 1 and 2, eliminating the downtown parking regulations years ago, that was one of the first implementation steps that came out of the AIA study. And in addition to that, I just want to highlight some of the things that Council actually adopted this year. And in the comprehensive plan, some of the things that you all adopted this year included form-based code. These are all in the implementation chapter that you adopted in the comprehensive plan this year. The East Entryway Monument, expanding the street art program, replacing light and signal poles in the downtown, placing overhead utilities underground, creating public viewpoints and overlooks along the bluff, improving the downtown banners and entries to downtown, infill development in the downtown, and national park presence in the downtown. All of those were approved in the comprehensive plan. In addition to that, Council also approved a number of those AIA items into the capital facilities plan, including city entryway monuments, civic pier railing replacement, the Olympic Discovery Trail improvements, again, wayfinding, Waterfront Phase 3 that's now coming more out as Renaissance, the Valley Creek Loop Trail, public viewpoints, Race Street Complete Street, and the First and Front Street decoupling. So those are the items that Council actually took action on this year, and just a good reminder of that study continues to be moving forward in this community. In addition to that, I want to highlight another strategic plan item that is incorporated a memo in your packet, and that was a gap analysis looking at landscape and tree standards throughout the city, all the different regulations, policies that we have established on those. And I would draw your attention to page L2, where we have a number of summary findings as a result of that gap analysis. And I think those are important to think about. Most importantly, really thinking about those as we move forward with the code amendments in the new year. And the final item is just an update to the entire strategic plan, updating each of the individual items in the plan itself. And that concludes the city manager's report.
Thank you. So now we have come to the second public comment period. I see we got a first commenter.
John Ralston, City Port Angeles. So, because I've been locked out of the past 2 comment periods, can I take 15 minutes?
No.
No, okay, I'm just kidding.
It's 2 minutes.
So I wanted to comment, ask Nathan briefly about the landscape issue here. I was present at the July 2nd conversation with the arborist, and I'm sitting with a couple other foresters, and I feel comfortable in saying that 3 of us had some slightly different opinions than the arborist. So as these plans or proposed plans move forward, I hope there's a public discussion about this and not just adopting what the arborist said. What the arborist said in total. And then finally, I want to thank you guys for adopting some of the municipal code changes, and I will be applying probably in towards the end of the first quarter for a building of a duplex in a lot in an R7 zone that's less than 7,000 square feet. So thank you.
Great. Great to hear. Great. Anybody else in the audience who would like to address the council at this time?
Thank you, Bill Wilson. Just wanted to let you know I'm going to turn all of you into the Fair Labor Act for minimum wage violations. All the committees that you're attending and the time that you spend here, what is it, 4 hours a night, and probably equally as much for the rest of the time. So I don't believe you're making minimum wage yet. I would encourage you to go back in session, double the amount so that these incoming people can appreciate what you have been through for all these years. And, but really, I'm going to echo what Michael was saying a while ago. The way it's set up now, only the well-employed or the well-married or people that's got a lot of money can afford to come up here and do this. And that's as if you're saying there's no wisdom out there except for the people like us that are well-employed and have a good husband or wife or something that can afford to do it. So please consider, and then whoever is the next incoming people, consider raising it to $1,000 a month minimum, so that the people who have some good ideas, that have some good leadership skill, have some team building skills, give them a shot at it. Because right now, you've got to, and if you look back over I've only been watching this for 8 years, but I can imagine going back even longer, it's only been that cadre of people that have been representative of the city council in Port Angeles, and we got to face it, that's not fair. And the second thing I was thinking about, appreciate your update on the Boise case, because that's one I've been watching too. And I've noticed that these guys and gals are beginning to gather out here. And I think that's a great idea. I think that they should move up here, move away from the Papa Studios, and move out here on the city council, so that it can be remembered every time that we come here for a meeting, we have a problem with homelessness, and it's not going away. It's going to have to take a top-tier effort for all of us. And it's going to have to get some outside-the-box thinking. I don't think we can build enough homes for them. So I don't know what it's going to take. They've had 10 cities in Seattle didn't work very well, but and then the tiny houses. I'm going to go back again to what I said a couple of years ago. Whenever the city made this demolition permit for them to destroy 35 perfectly good homes at the Peninsula Housing Authority, and then just last year they had such a big deal about the Peninsula Housing Authority is going to have these 10 families come down here and build 10 homes on 10th Street. Why didn't they move those 10 homes, 10 of those 33 that got crushed and taken to the depot, why didn't they bring those down to 10th Street? Why didn't they find all of the city lots that are available and move those homes down here? Guys, we've got to think out of the box, and we've got to address these things because it's not getting any better. The winters are getting colder. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks, anybody else? Well, it looks like we are adjourned. Thank you all.